And I urge a second so that we can accomplish this necessary task quickly
Do
before
I have a
any
second?
harm ensues.
Second.
So second from Sharon.
Oh, Sharon.
Any other nominations for chair? Practicing my wait time. I was trained to do this as a teacher.
By John Saffier.
Hearing none, all in favor of Nancy Scott becoming chair?
Aye.
Aye.
All against? That would be unanimous. Congratulations, Madam Chair. I yield the mic.
Really?
And gavel, but you guys didn't give me one.
I can't do a meeting without a gavel. Thank you, everyone, I think.
Welcome back, Nan.
Thanks. All right, so next up on the agenda is nominations for vice chair. Anyone? Miss Jackie?
I'd like to nominate Meredith Henderson as vice chair.
And a-
Second.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Should be
Any
two
other
times.
nominations? Seeing none, we have a vote for chair. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Vice chair.
Aye.
Excuse me, vice chair. I was already relinquishing.
Yeah, very
First night
quickly.
back.
No, I didn't sneak that in quite enough. I'm sorry. Vote for vice chair. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Seeing none, it is unanimous. Congratulations, Ms. Meredith.
Thank you.
I will yield to you shortly. Just kidding. So, next up on the agenda is we actually need to go into an executive session, and we need to do an executive session pursuant to MGL C30A, Section 21A, Paragraph 3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining with the Monomoy Regional Educators Association, MREA, Units A and B, if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the district's bargaining or litigation position and the chair so declares it. We will be coming out for a regular session approximately 7 p.m. I would entertain a motion to go into executive session.
So moved.
In a second.
Second.
Okay, we need to do a roll call vote. Ms. Long,
Aye.
Ms. Henderson.
Aye.
Mr. Osceola,
Joe Osceola, aye.
Ms. Stout. Aye. Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Ms. Polly. Aye. And Ms. Games. Aye. And the chair says aye and is unanimous. So we will be going into executive session and we will be coming out approximately 7 p.m. So thank you very much.
Everyone's like seeing that? Okay, moving on. Good. Ooh. Look at this on a legal size.
I know, look at that.
All right, so we are back from our executive session and coming back to public session at 6:59 PM. And we are all here. Mr. Osceola is working his way back to his chair. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the June 10th minutes. May I entertain a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. And a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion or questions or comments? Seeing none, do I need to do roll call votes still if we're in public
No,
session?
because I think we're all in the room.
Okay,
Yeah.
so all in favor of approval of the June 10th minutes?
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Seeing none. What-
Danielle has to abstain. Okay, just for formality.
Yeah,
Yeah, I abstain.
okay, so Daniel abstains, but otherwise it passes unanimously. Thank you. Next on the agenda is public comment. Is anybody here from the public would like to address the school committee? Seeing none, we will move on to reports and discussions. And first on that list is we're going to welcome our newest committee member, Danielle Tolley. Thank you very much for joining us, and welcome. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, or not? It's up to you.
I'd just like to say thank you. I'm really excited to work with you all and collaborate, and I know I have much, much to learn and listen, so I look forward to learning from you all and serving our community, and I appreciate the complicated work that is done, that you all have been working on, and so I'm excited to be here, and thank you, and I humbly ask for your patience as I get my feet and, get a better grounding in serving on the committee.
Awesome. We're very glad to have you join us. Thank you. Right, next on the agenda is the report out from our executive session. This executive session was actually for us to discuss the MREA contract negotiations. We had a Unit A and Unit B negotiation contract year, and thankfully, we had them finish up recently, where Unit A and Unit B both ratified the contracts recently, and in executive session, we also approved those contracts. Mr. Russell, would you like to give a little report out, or we pass it off to Dr. Carpenter?
Sure, thank you. Just echo what Dr. Carpenter said a few moments ago. Not only our volunteer group of school committee members and our helpers, but I want to thank the Unit A as well as Unit B representatives who negotiated in a very challenging way. We did most of all the negotiations via computer, virtually. And considering that it was probably not just public school education, but our whole community, our whole country was sensing out a pandemic that never any of us had any experience. So that as a background, and I've often said it, but I thought the willingness to listen, the fairness of statements back and forth, concluding after several months with what I think to be a fair and reasonable contract agreement for both the Unit A staff as well as the Unit B. So it was, I think, a rewarding experience.
Thank you. Do we want to go into some details?
Yes, I think it's just appropriate to publicly just share some of the highlights of the two agreements. And I'd like to sort of tag on to what Terry had said. I think these were challenging times. I mean, we entered into negotiations during a pandemic. This wasn't negotiations where we were sitting around the table, across from one another. And we also were in a very different fiscal place at the beginning of negotiations to where things are starting to look now. So the committee, the committee went into budgeting for next year very conservatively, and we were very conservative in what year one looks like. But we've also, in discussion with our towns, know that that in the out years, the hope is that we'll be rebounding from this pandemic, and that the local economies will be rebounding as well. So both Unit A and Unit B find a 1% increase for this upcoming school year, a 2.5% increase in the subsequent school year, and for the following school year, the third year of the contract, a 2.75% increase. Some of the substantive things that happen in the Unit A agreement, we had instructional leadership at the elementary level that was by grade, by building, and what we negotiated was instructional leadership at the elementary level to be by grade level across buildings. And again, it's a way that we can leverage some of the learnings that we've had on how to use technology to bring teachers together to collaborate, but also to to strive to have a more unified curriculum and approach that's happening at both elementary schools. We still acknowledge in the agreement that we've come up with that there's still some areas to work through. There's both a evaluation subcommittee that and sort of parameters identified for how we can improve teacher evaluation to have it be both more manageable for administration, and also more meaningful for our teachers, and also a stipend review subcommittee to look at the stipends that occur at the back end of the contract to make sure that that the monies that we have for stipends are being equitably distributed based on the time individuals are putting into the various activities with our students. And then I think that sums up things for some of the major things for Unit A. For Unit B, one of the things that I think was a long time in coming that we came to an agreement on is providing a stipend for some instructional assistants who work in our more challenging programs, that that if you have children that you're working with that need toileting, or children with behavioral challenges that may pull one's hair or bite the very people that are there trying to support them, that there is there's an additional $2,250 that are allotted as a stipend to sort of acknowledge and validate the difference in those roles. But that Unit B has the same COLA increase on it. So I think that's some of the substantive things that I think those out there in the public might want to know about. But we will have both the Unit A and Unit B MOAs posted on our website, and as these get melded into the final contract documentation, we can imagine over the course of the summer that there'll be the full new contracts posted in there.
Thank you. Anybody else from the subcommittee want to comment? Okay. I did want to echo Terry's comments. I think it was a lovely experience of the contract negotiations via Zoom. I think everybody was extremely respectful, and it was very productive. So thank you very much to the teachers and the assistants. So as we voted to approve the contracts in executive session, we do need to do it in a public session as well. So I'd entertain a motion to approve the Unit A contracts. Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Thank you. And any conversation or discussion
For Unit A?
for Unit A?
The only comment I'll make is I just want to publicly thank our teachers. It's been a tough year, and I really respect and thank all of them for just stepping up and doing what they did and got us through the year, so
Thank you. Okay. Any other conversation, discussion? All right. All in favor of approving the Unit A contracts?
Aye.
And opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you. And this passes unanimously. And I'll entertain a motion to approve the Unit B contract.
So moved.
Thank you, and a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Yes?
I would just like to repeat what I said. I want to thank everybody that in Unit B, our staff, our paraprofessionals. Again, thank you for just a good job this year. I mean, you got us through, and we appreciate it, so thank you.
Thank you. All in favor of Unit B?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? And that passes unanimously as well. Thank you. Start the new year fresh, which is excellent. Next up is the discussion of the treasurer finalist and a vote to appoint. Mr. McMillan, are you? I think Meredith is.
So, just to give a summary, we interviewed 3 candidates. 2 of the candidates were highly qualified. We put both of their full applications in your packet to review. We are recommending Paul Donlin to the position of District Treasurer. He is a long-term public school business manager. He lives locally, and clearly from our conversation, he will be a good fit for our district and the team at the business office. So if any of us have any questions, Michael would be happy to answer them.
Well played.
I can add that I did do reference checks on Mr. Donlin, and I called 3 of the people he'd recommended, and they all gave sparkling references from him and recommended him and said he would be the best appointment we'd make.
Thank you. Any, Dr. Carpenter?
Yeah, I think one of the things that speaks about Mike, or Paul Donlin, and why I think he might be a great fit is Paul worked for years in the neighboring school district to where Mr. McMillan was off Cape, and and just as I have tight relationships with with the superintendents that I work with here locally, I think that Paul very much applied for the job knowing that he'd have the opportunity to go and work with Michael, and knowing that he felt that could be a good team. And I think you find that, I think it's a reciprocal thing there. So I think this could be good for all.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for those who are not on the hiring committee regarding Mr. Donlin?
I have one last statement.
Okay.
Of course you do.
Of course.
Of course you do.
So I think of the candidates, Paul Donlin reminded me most of Don.
Oh,
And
Absolutely.
I think we have been blessed. I mean, Don was the first hire of the Monomoy Regional School District as treasurer, and
He predated you, right? He was here before you.
He
Yes.
predated me. He predated Katie Isernio. But Paul was, but Don was that first hire, and he was a very experienced business manager who came in to really support us, and I do think that that Paul has those Don-like qualities that I think I've come to appreciate over the years, and I think that for me was one of the factors that that made me feel like you're somebody I'd want to recommend to the committee.
Excellent. All right, so I will entertain a motion to, appoint the treasurer, Mr. Paul Donlin.
I would like to make a motion to appoint Paul Donlin to the position of Monomoy Regional School District Treasurer.
Thank you, and a second?
I would second that.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that passes unanimously. Welcome to Mr. Donlin.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
I would
sir.
suggest it's probably on your mind anyways to invite Paul to one of our
Of course
school
it was
committee
on
meetings
the
to introduce
tip
himself.
of my tongue. You just stole it right out of my mouth, Mr. Russell. Yes, I think it would be great to have him visit us. Thank you. All right, next up on the agenda are subcommittee appointments. In your packet is a nice blank form of the list of subcommittees, representatives, and liaisons that we have been working off of for several years. So every year we do kind of reorganize our subcommittee assignments as well. And typically, we start out with you making your preference, and I'm kind of describing this mostly for you, Danielle, because everybody else kind of knows, but you choose your preference. Typically, you pick 2, 3, 4, all of them, whatever your time allows.
As many as you can handle.
Well, and maybe one extra. If you think you can handle this many, add one more to the list. No, you pick out ones that sound interesting to you. And if you have any questions on any specific ones, please feel free to ask on what they actually do and what that actually means. But then, so our next meeting is July 14th. So if you can electronically or however you want to get them back to me, a list of what you think you would like to be a part of, and then I'll try to compile that list if we do it before our next meeting, and then I can have it ready for that meeting. I believe July 14th is our next meeting. So if you can get it to me before that, then I can kind of compile the list to see what people are looking for to be on. Does anybody have any questions?
Do you want it now?
Mr. Osceola? You have to fill out something, Jackie. You
I
can't
filled
leave it
out
blank.
4.
Mr. Osceola? She's feeling feisty.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting our input on this. Actually, our policy in our handbook says the chair has the authority to appoint
You are correct.
people to subcommittees. Then the subcommittees have the authority to select their own chair.
Correct.
But I appreciate the invitation of our point of view. There's a few points about what's on offer, so to speak. Given what we have concluded on negotiations, it makes sense that we've got the negotiation subcommittee down to 3 as opposed to 4, because much of the work has been concluded, right? I guess that's an optimistic view about how the next set of negotiations will go. The policy subcommittee last year had 3 school committee members instead of 4. Here I see 4 is returned. Does that suggest that policy subcommittee did not function effectively as it wished with 3 people, or is this simply photocopied from the past and nobody's thought about it? And then finally, on the Westgate Foundation, just a question. Our previous representative suggested that the position did not need a school committee representative. I don't know if that's true or not. I have never served there, but it's a question that might be raised with the foundation to see if they wish to have or need a school committee representative. If they're not interested, that's one good answer, and if they are, then of course we'll continue to staff it. And then finally, the Cape Cod Collaborative, where it says number 2, alternative, that probably could be stricken out, because by their bylaws, if the person assigned is unable to attend, someone else can attend but can't participate. All they can do is listen quietly. And what they would do is they'd receive the documents, basically. But all of those can be forwarded or sent. So the alternative is somewhat misleading. For some committees, you're the Monomoy person, and if one is absent, person B comes in. For the collaborative, if you're not the person that they've elected, vetted, et cetera, you come in, you're not elected that day to be the representative. It's a cumbersome process that seems to be peculiar to them, but the alternate really is in an awkward, not terribly useful position. I would suggest strike it. And I'd just come back to the question on policy subcommittee. I would certainly like to hear from members of the policy subcommittee if 4 people continue to be needed, or if 3 was sufficient given the role that is played by the administrator on that committee.
Well, I see 2 policy people ready to speak, so I'll let Sharon first, and then Tina, if you want to address his question about policy.
I think it's a good question. I think personally that 3 is a minimum, but if 4 people want to be on it, I don't see a problem with that. Especially if you happen to have new people or anyone that has never been on it, it might be a good time for them to get to know more about it.
Okay. Thank you. Tina?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to answer Joe's question that it is true that last year we knocked policy down to 3 at the recommendation of Mr. Osceola, which we did, but I don't believe it was a permanent decision. So we pulled back out, Leah and I pulled our previous thing. So it still has, the numbers that we were working with before last year. And going to what Sharon had said, my thought is certainly we could operate with 3 on policy. However, I think it's always good when we can and where we can to have a nice balance on the committees between Chatham and Harwich representatives. So that's why we've always had 4. Now negotiations has dropped to 3. That is true. For whatever reasons, I'm not sure, but that was decided at some point. So that's just my only comment. Regarding Westgate Foundation, I can speak to Joanne Sheehan was our representative last year, and my understanding is she never had a meeting. So, and I don't know if that was COVID related, I have no idea, but I know that she never got called for a meeting.
Thank you, Tina.
I'll sign up for that.
Oh, of course.
I would sign up for that.
So if I have 8 names for Westgate Foundation, I'm gonna sign up for it, at my discretion. So I will reach out to the Westgate Foundation and find out if they're planning on having a meeting. So if you are interested, please put your name down, but not just because you've heard that there's no meetings. Ms. Long?
If my memory serves me, when we were doing this last year, we were shuffling people around a lot, and that might have also been a reason why we pulled someone out of policy.
That was.
And, yeah, because we were just like, you know what?
Yeah.
It was more important to have someone here than there, or whatever it was, so, and I also served on the policy subcommittee this year, and it's always a great policy to, a subcommittee to start on,
Hint, hint, Danielle.
but.
I'm not sure if you got both.
No, wink, wink. But, and I'll agree with Tina and disagree, because I can see both sides of it. 3 was difficult because sometimes it was always 2 to 1, or, or in one way or the other. I did never look at it as Chatham Harwich, just because our policies don't always necessarily go to one town or another. And it does have to come to the committee for a vote, so there's that to look at. But as far as, it's a good working group, so 3 or 4 works. I thought we did well this year as 3. Plus you have Melissa, who doesn't necessarily have a vote, but she's kind of a 4th person there. So I would be fine going forward with it with 3 people would be my feedback.
Mr. Russell?
Just a clarification with Danielle also. If some member of the committee could just explain that where do most of the policies come from, and then to us as a school board?
I would be glad to talk to that.
Sorry, Jack.
Go ahead, Sharon.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, Sharon can, that's fine.
So the state organization of school committees have already put together some of these, like a template. And we look at the template and we think about that, but since our director of student services wasn't on, she's not on the policy committee, but she wasn't attendance for the first several years, but now she goes to them and she often drafts something that usually is more detailed than what the state has. So we talk about all that.
Did you want?
Is that good?
You can go, Tina.
Oh, I think Jackie.
Ms. Games?
The other thing I wanted to say, with policy 2, we discovered this year there were a couple policies that we were kind of missing, which that was Melissa McGuire, Director of Student Services, she brings things to our attention. We also get feedback from the Mass Association of School Committees, of which I'm marketing this evening. And then we also have school committee members who may have an interest in a certain policy, and they may come to the policy to ask us to look at it. So I think it comes from lots of different angles, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And are there any other people besides Melissa who participate in the policy subcommittee or any of these other committees, or is it just school committee members on these subcommittees?
No, it is not just school committee members. Yes, there is almost always a member from the administrative team a part of it. So for finance, well, for superintendent evaluations, the superintendent's a part of them. For finance, we usually have Mr. McMillan. Mark Smith usually comes in as well on occasion, and Dr. Carpenter is there with us. For negotiations, the three dynamic duo or trio over there. And then policy, you'll come in on occasion as needed. Sometimes the food service director will come in. So it kind of depends on what policy they're discussing and get feedback from them that way.
And I'll add, all policy subcommittees are open to the public as well.
Well, yeah, all of these meetings are open to the
Yeah, all of
public
them
as
are,
well.
so.
They're all posted meetings. We've never had public attendance, but they're all posted.
They're just not interested.
Right?
We did have one.
So
Yeah,
I would
that's
actually, to follow up with Joe's point, I think that the four main subcommittees, the evaluation, finance, negotiations, and policy, I think it's a good practice to have 4 members for each. So I would actually request that we add a 4 under negotiations, so that we would have 4 members there. The reason why we can't have more than 4, Danielle, is because 5 would be a quorum, and we're not allowed to have a quorum on a subcommittee. So you can only have 4 members, which is just under. So that's why we don't have more, but we can always have less. So I would actually entertain me putting number 4 under negotiations for a 4th person. We actually did have 4 members on negotiations this year for Unit A. Unit B, Merida stepped aside for conflict of interest. So put 4 there. I will ask about the Westgate Foundation. Joe, you were the representative on the collaborative this year, correct?
I was.
So I take his recommendation that an alternate is not needed on that one, so we'll just have 1 name on that one. Anything else, question-wise?
Madam Chair?
Yes, ma'am.
Under Select Board and Finance Committees, you might notice that we added 2 words, kind of in one of my little tasks as the outgoing chair. I felt it was important with the working group, which we'll kind of talk about later in the agenda, the Regional Agreement Working Group, that everyone or whoever signs up in that group also be prepared to be part of the working group.
Okay.
Because you're working closely and following select board meetings and finance committee meetings, and it's helpful to kind of, since you're in that little circle, you might as well be in the working group. And so I thought it made sense to put that on there if you agree. Well, we just went ahead and just plopped it in there.
Sure, I'll work with that for now.
Okay.
And then also to Joe's point, you mentioned that it can be appointed at the chair's discretion. That'd be where I get to move around when you don't actually select certain things. I can move people and at my discretion, point them to certain subcommittees to make sure that we have a full thing. And then once the subcommittees are full, then you guys can meet and decide who's going to be chair of that subcommittee, so that they'll take care of the reporting out when they come back to full meetings. Did I miss something? Yes, sir.
Just how do we resolve the negotiations? Is that just something the chair adds, or
I
are
would
we
just say
voting
number
on
to put
that,
a
or
4 in there.
we're waiting for
We had
a
a 4.
disagreement? Well, just that the one that's given to us doesn't, so how do we put,
Just write a number 4 underneath?
so you want to do it that way? We'll have a practical solution rather than a voting one, okay.
I'm going on past practice. We typically do have 4 members on negotiations. So it could have just been a slip of the computer, and it just didn't notice. This was the first time, well, not the first time I saw it the other night, but didn't pay that close attention to numbers. So
You think it was a computer error?
I have no idea. It could have been, because it looks like finance has a really large space and negotiation has a really small space, and
I have a 4 on mine, Joe. I don't know about you.
I have a circle around my 4. So I guess we should say, without objection, we should add a number 4 to the negotiations subcommittee. Is that better?
That would be satisfactory,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you. All right, so we'll move on. Please get this back to me at your convenience. Next on the agenda is it's actually, I think, second reading of the 2020-2021 superintendent evaluation. So at our last meeting, we all presented our individual evaluations regarding Dr. Carpenter, and now we have the compiled summative report and narrative that Ms. Sheehan did for us prior to her leaving. that it is time for us to discuss this with a potential vote this evening on the documents that you've received in email earlier and in your packet this evening. Does anybody care to, from the superintendent's subcommittee, present this? Or maybe Ms. Games as outgoing chair? It doesn't matter to me, or I can do it, doesn't matter. Because I can read it. Ms. Games?
Yeah, I will yield to Mr. Osceola. This was something we had agreed on back when I was the chair, so I'm going to yield it to Mr. Osceola, if that would be okay with you.
We don't mean to presume from the prerogative of the chair.
Oh, no, I'm passing the buck as often as I can.
Okay.
Please, Mr. Osceola.
Sure. The end-of-cycle summative evaluation report of the superintendent is first gives an indication of how the 42 or so subcategories were quantified, and then there is about a two-page summative evaluation, which I'll read out tonight. That comprises our that concludes actually our evaluation for this current year, and then we have to put this forward to a vote. So first off, everyone does have this in their packets. Is that true? Okay. Well, overall, the superintendent in step one assessed progress toward goals. These were all met. When it came to assessment on the performance standards, of which there were 4, instructional leadership and management of operations, the superintendent was proficient. Standard 3, family and community engagement, the superintendent was considered exemplary. And standard 4, professional culture, the superintendent was considered proficient. And I would like to point out, as I said at the last meeting, that proficient is described by the Department of Education as a very high standard, and it is a considerable achievement. Exemplary is at an entirely another level, which says that someone has done work of such outstanding nature that it could serve as a model for other professionals, as other superintendents in the Commonwealth. And so it's a very strong affirmation throughout that the school committee has given to Dr. Carpenter. Overall, the judgment is proficient, and I just underscore that is a very high standard indeed. So now we come to the text, and here the person who is compiling this is supposed to put together, the standard is put together a kind of statement that indicates or includes the preponderance of opinion that the school committee members present individually, and Ms. Sheehan has done that. What she says here is as follows. The theme of the summative text is standard 3, the family and community engagement. 3D addresses family and community concerns in an equitable, effective, and efficient manner. So in other words, Ms. Gaines, I should say, and everybody else on the committee, we agreed that the standard of exemplary was so important that Joanne, then Chair, Ms. Gaines, and then I all thought, yes, this is exactly what should be highlighted. So everybody's going to have a statement included in here, which we also came up with from our subcommittee. So if you don't mind, I'll just start reading. A majority of Monomoy Regional School Committee members evaluated Dr. Carpenter's practices when addressing issues with Monomoy families and communities as exemplary. This assessment indicates that Dr. Carpenter communicated consistently well with families and community about their concerns in an equitable, effective, and efficient manner. Exemplary practice significantly exceeds proficiency and can serve as a model for practices regionally or statewide. Quote, every academic year could reasonably be described as a challenging one. Multiple issues arise on many levels, decisions must be made, and sometimes in unique circumstances, experience provides little or no guidance in navigating the best course forward. The COVID pandemic added more than the usual stresses and burdens to the tasks of public education. Close quote from myself. Each member of the Monomoy Regional School Committee, in his summative evaluation, presented an observation of Dr. Carpenter's exemplary communication practices and are presented below. Ms. Tina Games references her past experiences, quote, "Having a background in public relations and evaluating Dr. Carpenter through this lens, I have observed many occasions in this school year, whether it was adjusting to COVID-related measures or the financial inequities between our two towns or the future of our elementary schools, where he has gone above and beyond in his engagement with family, community members, and local town officials," end quote. Ms. Meredith Henderson adds this to the conversation, quote, "During the school year, it has been essential to have clear communication with staff, families, and community members. Dr. Carpenter held and participated in multiple virtual meetings to share information about what was happening in our schools, as well as answer questions from parents and community members. He shared key information around reopening plans, up-to-date COVID information, and analysis of the possible elementary configurations," end quote. Mr. Terry Russell points to how Dr. Carpenter responded when he, quote, "faced the ongoing COVID crisis with a calm resolve to put in place a three-phase learning mode, which became a Cape-wide model to emulate. He also enacted a daily, weekly monitoring of COVID impact in all the Monomoy schools. His weekly updates to staff, parents, and the community were fact-filled, yet cautiously optimistic, urging all to follow healthy best practices during this pandemic," end quote. Ms. Nancy Scott begins with, quote, "It is necessary to sing the praises of Dr. Carpenter's vision and desire to get our kids in the classroom as much as possible, while also providing a safe environment for all at the start of the 2020 school year. By working with administrators, teachers, staff, parents, students, and the community, Dr. Carpenter worked to create collaborative plans for reopening all of the buildings as much and as soon as possible in September for all students at every level. This provided the best educational, psychological, and social environment for our students," end quote. Or, excuse me. Despite the upheaval of the pandemic, Dr. Carpenter has stayed focused on the strategic plan, especially communication with the community. At every step taken to continue a strong educational program, Dr. Carpenter not only informed the community of the path forward, but he provided a frank discussion of his rationale. Recognizing his plans may not gain approval from all, several times he used the phrase, "I'm sure this isn't the response you wanted, but," in his communications. How fortunate our community is to have a leader who recognizes the basic human need of belonging, and his goal is always to best serve our students. A quote from Mrs. Sheehan herself. Ms. Sharon Stout ends her evaluation with, quote, "In summary, during this pandemic, I have never been prouder of the Monomoy schools. This credit goes to parents, students, teachers, and all staff, but it also, in large part, goes to the leadership of Dr. Carpenter. Monomoy, by staying open and providing education and stability, was a beacon of commitment to our children, families, and community while enforcing the necessary safety measures to do so," end quote. Ms. Jackie Zabrat Long shares her optimism by reflecting on the, quote, "countless hours, determination, and creativity he allowed our administration, staff, and students to continue to thrive in what some might say the most difficult years of your district's existence. Countless forums for parents, students, and staff were available to keep everyone informed, educate, and able to monitor the progress of our district. I am most proud of our superintendent for, and the district was, their quick response to the need for improvement and how we respond to our cultural diversities and what that should look like as we move forward. The district launched the Equity Task Force, and promptly many other subcommittees took the lead with the roles they play in our community. just going to pause for water with allergies and I are in a bit of a war. Hope that helps. And then finally, Mr. Osceola concludes, our fundamental core value is to educate the young people in our district. Going forward, the superintendent and the administrative team will need to assess the extent of educational loss and gains among students and will need to develop or fine-tune the best strategies that will lift student achievement. Additionally, Ms. Sheehan cautions, quote, that contrivances should be avoided as they will politicize the Monomoy School District's mission of educating our students well and engender honest communication. They have no place in the equitable education offered in our public schools as promoted by our Equity Task Force. So that concludes the narrative summary, and I remind you, we need to vote.
Thank you, Mr. Osceola. Questions? Ms. Stout?
I almost tried to look it up. Thank you, that's quiet. I love this. I think it was very well done. I wasn't exactly clear on the next to last sentence about contrivances should be avoided as they'll I'm not sure what that means. Does anyone know what that means? Unfortunately, we don't have Joanne here.
We don't have Ms. Sheehan here to explain. Anybody like to give a summary of that sentence?
Screams, Mr. Osceola.
It does. It definitely does. Do you know where she's talking about?
Next to last sentence.
Yeah, I know what the sentence is. She was not terribly specific, and I'd hate to put words in her mouth, and we'll have to just accept that with a bit of a question mark, but I get the feeling contrivances, we're definitely not in favor of those. So we shall strive not to contrive, and if we can do that, I think we should be okay.
All right.
That was good. Any further discussion on this evening? We do have this evaluation for a potential vote, so if somebody would care to make a motion to approve the document as presented by Mr. Osceola. Ms. Zebrat Long.
I move to approve the 2020-2021 superintendent evaluation documentation as presented at our meeting tonight.
Thank you, and a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Yes.
Okay, Danielle abstains, and so that goes by unanimously. Thank you. All right, congratulations, Dr. Carpenter, you are done for another year. We are up to our FY22 budget revote. Mr. McMillan,
All right, so I have you for like 3 or 4 agenda items now.
you just
Have
go
we
ahead and stand up there and just keep
It's going
talking.
to be quick.
Madam
Chair?
Chair, we,
Number 6?
Oh, I'm sorry, I saw superintendent. Sorry, please hold, Mr. McMillan. Superintendent evaluation cycle, thank you very much. I saw superintendent and checked it, sorry. Mr. Osceola, I believe that's back to you for superintendent evaluation cycle with a vote.
Mr. McMillan, this will be relatively brief, so you needn't remove yourself there. Yes, the Superintendent Evaluation Subcommittee is one of the committees that is a standing committee, but of course it's appointed for a year. We conclude our work tonight, and we have, by a majority vote, we recommend to the school committee that the committee continue to evaluate the superintendent on the basis of a one-year cycle. And that is a decision that, of course, this committee as a whole needs to make, but our motion is, and I'm making that motion, that we continue on a one-year cycle for evaluating superintendent. And I look optimistically for a second.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Ms. Stout as a second. Jackie was just louder, but Ms. Stout was there first. It wasn't you, it was oh, sorry, Meredith.
Pull it together.
I can't see, it's just cats and dogs living. All right, so I have a motion and a second to continue the superintendent cycle as a one-year evaluation cycle. Any discussion? Mr. Osceola.
I'm going to oppose it. And for quite a serious reason, while you were summarizing, I was switching hats. As a chair of a subcommittee, I want to accurately report the opinion of the subcommittee, but it's not an opinion I share. I'm not here tonight to motivate another motion. I don't believe that the divided vote in a subcommittee needs always to roll into the larger committee to hash things out all over again. I think that's what our subcommittee did, and I think we took our work seriously and did it well. I was in favor of a 2-year evaluation cycle. I think the current evaluation argues for it in that the superintendent is becoming increasingly well-regarded by the committee. But the simple fact is I failed to convince a majority on our subcommittee, and that's that. So our recommendation stands as a committee, but I personally hope that in the future, maybe in a new iteration, when I and others move from this committee to something else, and there's a new group of people here, maybe they'll reconsider it. They may think differently than we do. That's up to them. But for the present moment, I just want to explain why it may seem odd that I make a motion in one way and then vote against it. And it's because I'm speaking as two different roles here, as a chair and as an individual member of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Osceola. Mr. Russell?
Thank you, Joe. I want to commend you. I think it was a challenge. All year long, I'm a member of that subcommittee. I'm going to subtract several of my subcommittees. But there was a less than heated discussion, but involved in, because there is a lot of merit to it. I was the one that opposed the logic of a second year, so I suppose I'll take the moment to have my comments, at least so that I can think on what I said. I come from a different slot because I was probably the exception with Dr. Carpenter last year. And this year, I was the only one to write exemplary summative for him. So I should be one of the ones to say 2 years. Let's look at a 3-year. However, here's how I look at it, not as Dr. Carpenter, but as the role of a superintendent. I listed 4 or 5 things, at least for myself, made sense, but who knows? First of all, the strength of a yearly superintendent evaluation. I go up to Boston yearly for medical physical. Very important to do. My health. All our principals are yearly evaluated as principals by the superintendent. The elected school committee members, all of us, one of the prime reasons why we are seated here is to evaluate the superintendent. As probably the most prominent person hired in the 2 towns, I think it's appropriate that the citizens would expect that a yearly evaluation of some form, which we get from the state, DESA, to review even for those who are doing proficient work, most especially if something happened that needs to be reviewed. A sidebar on that. I guess I'm the oldest one here, and I have a challenge, not jokingly, to review my thoughts for a whole year versus 2 years. And I know it's been said, well, 1 year could be formative, the next year could be summative. I just find that 2 years, all of a sudden, all of the vagaries become something for us to either review and harder work for us. In one sense, it's easier for the school committee if we waited 2 years. In reality, I don't think it is. I think it's more of a challenge. The job is complex enough without having 2 years to look backwards. And that's not, again, not just for Scott, it's for any superintendent. Timing, I think, is important. So I don't think this suggestion should be just laid to one side, because we're in a real critical time in our growth as a region. We have budget issues that continue that we need to stay on top of, and most especially we have an issue that has no easy solution with the Chatham Elementary School's children diminishing in numbers, which is going to take all of us. So that yearly progress, I think, is worth having someone that we look towards and see how things go regarding that. An odd but different thing about 2 years evaluations, I use Danielle as an example. Any particular new school committee member elected for 3 years would only evaluate the superintendent once. And I don't see the logic in that. So those 4 or 5 thoughts struck me as absent 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 progressive communities in the state, and I give Joe credit. He attempted to reach these communities, as well as the school committee superintendencies and the committee statewide. And there was no response from him regarding the benefits of having a 2-year cycle. And maybe it was just too busy for people to respond to us. So not having that input, I right now thought it was best to go ahead yearly for us to have that opportunity to do what we just did the last 10 days. So however sense that made, I wanted to speak to it as to have, so that you can see 2 sides of maybe the same thing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. Ms. Stout?
I was the other person that felt like 1 year was good. I did see the merits, and I did, with Dr. Carpenter having been here for a number of years, I felt more confident with some unknown product. The teacher's contract, the teachers are evaluated each year, and I feel like that certainly if a teacher who affects that group of kids needs to be affected that much. Certainly somebody that's evaluating, having as much influence on the whole school would want to have at least that. But in addition to that, this year with the pandemic, I think we can see just one example of what can change on a dime. In 1 year, there could be a big change. And so for me, I just felt more comfortable with the 1 year. But I thought it was a very worthwhile discussion to think about these 2 possibilities.
Thank you. Ms. Games?
Thank you. I was not on the subcommittee, but I just wanted to take a moment to remind everybody, a year ago, in 2020, when we were doing the superintendent evaluation, COVID hit in March, I guess. And so, and I'll just speak for myself, but when I was doing my evaluation, I think we were all like looking at, oh my God, what did we do during these 4 months? And we couldn't, or I was like really having to go back and think, gosh, what did we do in the other 8 months? So I thought, if that could happen in just a year, imagine what might happen in 2 years. And so while I appreciate what you've done with this, Joe, and I agree the merits are strong, but I have to echo Terry and Sharon, because anything can happen. And you're having to evaluate a 2-year span, and something like COVID can hit, and you want to be here. So I think it makes sense to just keep it in the 1 year. So that's my comment.
Thank you. Any further comments, discussion? Yes, Dr. Carpenter? You don't get a vote.
I'll give you my 2 cents. I appreciate the intent. I think if I was, anytime I am providing you counsel on anything when it comes to a contract and an evaluation of the superintendent, ultimately as a contract, I'm always, suggesting that you take a more conservative posture. And, and I would say a 1 year, having a 1 year evaluation, I think is that conservative posture that, that if something else came up and it would be like, hey, what do you think about, evaluating the principals every other year? I would be, giving you, counsel to, keep it as an annual review.
Okay, thank you. So I want to echo pretty much what everybody said so far, is that I feel like it was a great idea to look into and do some research on and to think about, because Dr. Carpenter has been rated proficient every year, at least. I'm not sure you ever got an exemplary, but I know that you never got anything below proficient. And so therefore, it makes sense that, you've been proficient. You've been doing fantastic work here. And yet, it is part of our role to evaluate and to kind of hold you to what you say you're going to do on an annual basis. So I think I would agree that I believe our job doing an annual, and I think getting feedback regularly on an annual basis is always more helpful than Well, do you remember 2 years ago in spring of 2019, when this occurred, and it's like, well, that was 2 years ago, well before pre-COVID. So I would have to agree as well, but we still need to vote on. Any other further discussion on the motion on the table, which is to support a one-year evaluation of the superintendent? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
One
And with an
no.
apology for misleading Mr. McMillan.
But the motion passes. It wasn't so quick. You should have said that. Now, Mr. McMillan, please, the FY22 budget revotes.
All right. Thank you very much. So there's when we do when we calculate the assessments, we use percentages to 2 decimal points, which means that all our figures, there's always like a bit of a rounding issue in our numbers. So this year, when we sent the numbers over to, the numbers we voted were to 2 decimal places, so we went dollars and cents. And when we sent them over to the town of Harwich and the town of Chatham, they voted on the town meetings, but they just rounded them up. So I just wanted to bring us in line with what they voted. There was also a rounding error. There's always going to be a rounding issue, but in future I'll resolve it earlier on. But what that now means, when they're rounded up, it means that the constituent parts of the assessments, which is like operating assessment, capital, transportation and debt, are all like, when you add them all up for Chatham, there's a dollar difference between the actual total is. So I've resolved that by rounding up Chatham's capital assessment. But you didn't vote on that at the time, so I'm not asking you to re-vote that now. That was just for your information. And so the vote where I'm asking for now is just to round up those assessments as detailed in the memo.
Is that a dollar increase for Chatham?
Yeah, well, it's like a 57-cent increase for Harwich and a 43-cent increase for Chatham.
I believe if in your packet on page 2,
I have both.
the numbers are highlighted for us. If somebody would care to make a motion. Ms. Meredith.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the fiscal year 2020 regional assessments as followed. Town of Harwich assessment, $27,361,049, and the town of Chatham assessment at $8,524,697.
For a total of,
For
the end of the line.
a total of $35,885,700, nope, nope, nope. $35,885,745.
46.
There's help on the way.
It's on the second. It's the second
Oh, it's
one.
the second page.
Second page.
Sorry, I should have put that in the motion.
Third time's the charm.
Yep.
Okay.
$35,885,746.
Thanks, Mary.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll second that.
Sold.
And a second. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And that passes unanimously. Thank you. Mr. McMillan, the Harwich Elementary School playground donation.
All right, thank you very much. So as you may well be aware, the Harwich Elementary School is in need of a new playground, and work is underway to do that. The work is being led by the town of Harwich, though, rather than the school district. And that was the agreement reached with the town of Harwich. So that work is underway. However, the district had collected over the years money to help support that project. However, we're not actually paying the bills now because it's been led by the town of Harwich. So we would like to pass on some of those funds to the town of Harwich in order to pay for some of those bills. So our plan is to kind of do it as needed, rather than just giving them all the money. We'll do it as needed. And for the first request was for $25,000 to pay for design and consultancy costs with the firm that's doing the design of the project and helping with the procurement. So I've included the contract and the invoices received so far, so I would ask for your approval for us to donate those funds to the town of Harwich.
Thank you. Ms. Zebrat-Long?
I move to approve a donation of $25,000 from the Harwich Elementary School Playground Revolving Fund to the town of Harwich for costs associated with the construction of a new playground as presented.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That is unanimous. Keep
All right.
going, you're on a roll.
Thank you very much. So each year, the district receives state transportation reimbursement, so that's for our transportation costs. We report those to the state, and then they reimburse us for some of those costs. However, so at the start of the year, when we're doing our budget, we have to estimate how much we think we're going to get from the state. But that can change as the state's budget changes, and if there's a difference, if we receive more than we thought we were going to receive, so there's a sort of a surplus, we can ask you to vote for that to be moved to offset a future assessment. So we've been doing that now since FY15. So, and I've provided the history here. And so the vote today, so the surplus is $199,348. So we got that more than we had expected, and that will be used to offset the FY23 budget, because the FY22 budget's all set, so we can't use it for this upcoming year, so we have to vote for it to be used for the following year's budget. So you'll see that when I come back to you as we start doing the FY23 budget. If you approve that, you'll see this number pop up there.
Thank you. Any questions? Entertain a motion, please. Ms. Zebrat-Long?
I move to approve an offset of $199,348 to be applied to the FY23 transportation portion of the assessment.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. And I think this is your swan song with strategy on Esser Funds, Mr. McMillan.
No, I've got more.
Oh, you've got more after
Yeah,
that?
but this is the next one.
You just
Hey.
stay up there. Just run the meeting.
All right, so Leah is just bringing up some slides. We just wanted to give you an update on where we are with our Esser funds. So these are the funds that the federal government has voted to support local authorities and schools in facing the COVID pandemic. And if we go to the next slide. These are the funds we've already received and spent. This is just some history for your information. We received state funds of $92,000, technology-specific grant of $15,000. The very first federal relief fund was $390,000, and funds related to school lunch. So all those funds have been spent, and they went partly on things like supplies for masks and gloves and cleaning supplies, also on technology to support students as we went into remote learning last year and in part of this year, paid for plexiglass, and also has helped to offset some of the salaries for virtual classroom teachers that were added in order to allow remote learning to happen. So that's all happened. The next slide. So I'm just going to see if I can get it over here. Perfect. All right. Sorry, I'm not going to read through this, but basically, so there's been 3 separate Esser funds. The first was for $169,000, and we're allowed to spend that through to the September of 22. There are, I won't read through all the allowable uses, but it's very wide ranging. It allows us to respond to COVID, both in terms of like the physical safety aspect of it, of ensuring students are able to come to school and be taught or be taught remotely, and also responding to that, the challenges students have faced academically, socially, and emotionally. So it's very wide ranging in what we're allowed to do. And if we go to the next slide, then Esser 2, there we go, which was Another $653,000, and we're allowed to spend that through to September 23, covers all the same things, and actually that also introduced us being allowed to spend it on facilities. So facilities improvement for like HVAC improvement to ensure we're circulating air and to reduce the risks of infection related to, the virus. Should say at this point they also introduced that a student mental health services requirement that at least $10,000 must be spent on student mental health services. I think we expect to spend, as I'll say, spend a little bit more of that, but that was the first time where that specific requirement was was included. All right, the next slide. And then, so this is Esser 3, which is the big one, so that's $1.5 million. So this is, a significant amount of money we're receiving, over, significantly over $2 million. This we're allowed to spend through to September 24. I've highlighted some of the ones that we're going to be focused on, I think, that we'd like to propose focusing on for this grant. Improving indoor air quality, so coming back to that, those HVAC measures, addressing unique needs of specific student populations that have seen particular challenges under the impact of COVID. Also, summer learning and after-school programs, addressing learning loss, and then also just ensuring that we're able to keep running school and we're able to keep responding to the demands of COVID, whatever they may be next year. This is the little diagram. This is not to scale before anyone challenges me on why 23 to 24 is so small. But, and actually this was done before we knew that we're actually getting $1.5 million for SL3. But this just gives a sense of, the timeline for spending these grants, and we plan to spend them in this order. So as they expire first, we'll spend those ones first. So we've already spent the first 2 grants up there, Esser 1 and Esser 2, and Esser 3 we've not touched yet, but we've already started to receive Esser 1 and Esser 2 funds, and we will spend those first. And if you go to the next slide, so Esser 3, the application isn't due until October 4th, I think, and the requirements for that are a bit more stringent than the previous grants, understandably, because there's so much money involved. The application must include certain aspects. It must have a plan for safe return to in-person instruction. So we're all set there because we got that covered, which was great. But it must also show how funds will continue to mitigate the issues around COVID in line with CDC guidance. Again, I think we're good on that aspect. We have to use at least 20% to address the academic impact. I think ours will be a lot higher than 20%. I think that's going to be a big focus of what we would propose to do with these funds. We've got to include how we're going to spend Esser 1 and 2 funds, and we've got to show how we're going to respond to social, emotional, and mental health needs of all students, particularly those disproportionately impacted. Stakeholder engagement is a really big part of Esser 3 and something that the state has really stressed with us, and I'll just go into a tiny bit more detail on that on the next slide, or a couple of slides. And the last thing I'll just mention is maintenance of equity. So basically, state and federal government has said you can't use these funds to stop spending money on things you were already funding. So if, for example, the town of Harwich or town of Chatham came to us and said, oh, you've got all this money, great, we would like to cut our assessment by $2 million, that would run contrary to the requests, and so we wouldn't get the funds if that was the case, because understandably, state and federal government is like, hey, we're giving you all this money, we want to see something for it, not just more money going back into your municipal coffers. So these are our plans. This is what we've planned to do with Esser 1 and Esser 2 funding. So we've prioritised that funding for year 1 because we haven't even got through the application process for Esser 3 yet. So we're going to start by spending Esser 1 in years 1 and 2. Esser 1 and 2 in year 1, and plan to use Esser 3 funds for the future years because we've got longer to spend those through to September of 24. So the things we've identified to spend these funds on are before and after school programs, at Chatham and Harwich Elementary Schools and the middle school. And these funds this is paying for transportation for students, because that's often been a big challenge around after-school programs, is getting students to and from those programs. So it's before and after school, so we're looking at running transportation for both of those, and also, where required, paying for the additional staffing to be at those programs. Some of that was already budgeted, so it's not all of it, it's just the additional costs as we expand those programs. We are hoping to do some HVAC upgrades with these funds. Nursing, so we've kept on the nurse, as we discussed in previous presentations. We'd hired one nurse in response to COVID, and we're planning to keep that position on for at least another year as we continue to respond to the ongoing demands. And it's, we're all here without masks. It's definitely more relaxed, but we still expect there to be some issues, a requirement for us to respond quickly to any issues that come up in the nursing staff. We'll help with that. As mentioned, we are planning some funds for social and emotional learning and mental health needs, including at the high school, an instructional leader for SEL, which is at $4,442. Also, we have hired a consultant called Care Solace, which provides services to parents who need additional services beyond education. So if they need services to support their children, this organisation helps to put them in touch with other organisations who can help. And that has been really, because that's something our staff often spend time doing, and this organisation takes on some of those responsibilities. And we're also looking to work with a consultative supervision for mental health services. That's looking at how we provide mental health services in the district and coordinating them across all districts, and working with Melissa, Director of Student Services, on ensuring that our mental health services are comprehensive and supportive. We have high school summer programming, which we often have, but expected to be expanded this year. We have summer programming for the Harwich and Chatham, which is focusing on English learning students. And that comes back to some of those criteria about specific populations that need additional support. Math instructional support at HES, which is about instructional assistant for math, who's part-time, has been made full-time. And then math intervention teachers at Chatham, Harwich, and at the high school. And reading intervention at the teacher at the middle school. So, I mean, it's a huge boon for the district to have all these additional staff focused on math and reading, core subjects, and out to support students, particularly those coming back from, this year. And they'll have this extra support in the schools. And then also increasing the wellness teacher at the high school, which I think was a schedule need that we had anyway, because there was a high demand for that, the wellness course, but also in light of COVID and coming back to the social, emotional, and mental health issues, wellness is even more important, and that's why we've prioritised that here. So, I know that's a ton of stuff I've just thrown at you, but we just wanted to give you a sense of how we're planning to spend ESSER 1 and ESSER 2. So, ESSER 3, the next steps on that will be to kind of take this plan, and ESSER 3 funding is kind of, at the moment, our plan is to continue doing what we've started with 1 and 2. However, we want to go out and engage with the community, engage with all the people that the state is asking us to engage with, and share this information, share our proposals, and get feedback before we finalise our application to the state for October 4th.
Thank
All right, that's it.
Mr. Russell.
Thanks, Michael. It's certainly good news.
Yeah.
And it comes at the
Terry.
right time.
Your mic.
I don't want to have anyone hear
You know
me.
what? That's Keep talking.
Great list, and aren't we fortunate that the federal government is responding? My question is good news, and I'm sure your leadership team has thought of this.
Yeah.
There's about $2 million with a 3-year cap.
Yep.
Prior to this happening, you had Michael, yourself,
Yes.
and whatever your office staff that we
Yeah.
had interviewing, you know where I'm headed.
Yep.
Interviewing Paul.
Yeah.
Would you need a person to oversee, like a administrative assistant for a 3-year gap? Because I know the salary doesn't, we pick it up like Title I years ago, the town has, to allow you to have someone who would be on this every day so that the accounting of this makes it a lot easier. Now, could it be Paul?
Yeah.
That's a question mark, but I just see good news sprinkled with, oh my goodness. So,
Management,
that's
yeah,
my
oversight.
thought.
I think that's really a great point. So,
Did I say it
That's-
the way you wanted me to?
yeah, that's perfect. So, I mean, I'm not going to say bonus, but I think, so that is something we've been dealing with because another aspect of the response to COVID has been around FEMA. So, disaster relief funds are available for school districts. However, the FEMA process is like mind-bogglingly confusing. So one of the members of our team, Eileen Riley, has spent hours navigating the application process for FEMA, and that's all new additional work that we haven't done before, and that's all kind of come under the accountant's responsibility for grants. And so we kind of meet every couple of weeks to review all our grants, and you know, in the past that would be like 15-minute meeting because it's really straightforward. Now it's much more involved and much more complicated. Whether it amounts to the need for additional resources, I think that's something I'd like to keep under review. Like at the moment, I think we're managing, and I think we do have a little capacity within the team, and I think Paul will be able to help as well. I think right now, my priority would be to use these funds, you know, as close to the students as possible, and whenever, you know, as lean as we can make the support services, that's what I'd like to achieve. So for now, I think we're okay, but you know, it's definitely something we keep under review and we talk about. But thank you.
Thank you. Danielle?
I'm curious about the stakeholder engagement piece of this, and wondering if you can speak to what's the outreach plan for this and the timeline for it, and who's the point person for that, and how do you see that whole process moving forward?
That's in its very early stages. So so the work so far really has involved working with the principals, and we've been working, you know, partly with their staff in generating the kind of plan for Esser 1 and 2. We have a really well-developed community outreach process in place already that Joy Jordan leads up, and she's really great at getting out and communicating with the public. So Joy, working with the superintendent, and Mark are kind of starting to develop that plan. So it's not there yet, but that's kind of our plan for the summer through to October 4th.
I think Dr. Carpenter might want to add.
Yeah, we also had, as part of our agenda on the last virtual parent meeting, we were asking parents we were talking specifically about this and asking parents for their input. What they were suggesting is largely on this list, and I mean, they were suggesting things that had already come to us from staff and from administrators. I mean, a lot of them were really into the, let's layer on and make, find ways to extend the school day and have those after-school programs, be accessible. And, so that's, when you see at the elementary and middle school level, that's us trying to meet that want. I think we had also, been weighing, do we do a bunch of that this summer? And I think some of the feedback that we were getting is, people are kind of spent at the moment and really, had, either were, sort of in need of COVID, sort of rest and relaxation, or had already had summer plans. But it's, I think, a lot easier for us to get the services that we need to kids if they're already in the building and we're providing an ability for them to go and stay, an hour, 2 hours after school when there's transportation home.
Thank you. Ms. Stout?
I love the transportation to and from. I love the extra support for academics, social things before or after school. whole lot of these things I love. I'm a little concerned about the counseling, because it looks as though we're not really doing counseling till 2 or 3 years from now. And I know we needed to do it like this year. So, and I'm not really understanding what this other money is for the, sort of getting people to coordinate with us, or, I understand the outreach for parents, but the other portion, I wasn't too sure what that was. It was a decent amount of money, but, it was
The
like,
supervision for mental health
yeah, what does that mean?
That's in year one. That's coming next year.
Yes, but what is that?
This-
We're hiring a supervisor to come and help our counselors?
Mr.
Oh.
Smith's up here,
Okay, good.
chomping at the bit.
Mark Smith, Director of Curriculum Supervision, or Curriculum Instruction Assessment. It's been so long, I've been at the podium, I forgot my title. CIA. What that is positioned to be, so what we, in talking with our current counseling staff, one of the things that we heard from that team was that one of the things that they really felt like they needed was clinical supervision, right? So like looking for, being able to look for, and being a mental health professional yourself, like, so I know I'm sort of preaching to the choir here a little bit, like for them to be able to bring cases to somebody with clinical expertise to help support them. So instead of hiring like an additional body somewhere in the district, to be able to outsource clinical supervision, to be able to, and for everybody in the district in the counseling roles to be able to access clinical supervision. So that's part of what that is intended to be, is a consultative clinical supervisor for our existing staff. So investing in that position, or in that resource over the 3 years, and then also investing in more in tier 1 support, like so across all classrooms in social emotional learning, was where the team felt was the best places to invest support, because the real high level, like tier 3 level support is beyond really school, right? So there's a line between, this was a discussion we had, kids in real crisis, we're not hospital. Like hospital level care is hospital level care. So we can do what schools can do, and in order to better equip our existing counseling staff, they felt clinical supervision was the best way to do that, and to help all students was best to invest in tier 1 support. So that's where the ultimate sort of funding mechanisms landed.
I really appreciate that. I started that when I worked in Chatham. We hired Dee Berlin to come and consult with us, doing cases where we, just like you're talking about. However, it's not going to be enough. I mean, I'm not trying to say, because we only have so much money, that other things aren't needed too, but I'm just saying that I get 4 calls a day that I can't fill. And I mean, the parents, I think this is really innovative to try to get help for parents to help them access people. I think that's really wonderful. I just know there's just so much hurt out there. I know I've said this sort of, but I don't think having been a guidance counselor and adjustment counselor, the training for guidance counselors isn't this training. That's why this would be good. And for adjustment counselors, that school social worker, that is more the type of counselor that's needed for this. But all of the people can become a lot better in the caring, instead of talking about only college. I'm not saying we do that, but traditionally, guidance counselors would talk about coursework in college. Doesn't take but 5 minutes, or sometimes a lot longer, to be really caring. I just don't know. There's such a need out there, and there's not enough capacity. You can try to sell counseling as a career goal for people, at least at the present time. I don't know what all the changes that it's going to change at all.
Right.
But
Yeah, and we can't fix the counseling shortage on the Cape. Like, we don't have that capacity as a school
I
district to
know.
fix that problem.
Well, I know, but our interest is the kids, so.
Right.
I'm just putting my little plug in.
No, and
You've
I
got
appreciate
all
it.
these things to think about, and I'm, plugging this.
No,
because-
and so we're doing what we think is best
Yeah.
to support the students.
Yeah.
And I hear what you're saying. My wife's an LICSW and she gets just as many calls as you do. We
Yes.
can't fix that problem.
No, no, no,
Right?
no,
So,
no.
that's a bigger systems problem.
Yes, it
Same,
is.
all the hospital beds we're trying to get kids in hospital beds and there's no hospital beds
No.
to fill, right? We
No.
can't fix that problem.
No.
Monomoy Regional School
Right.
District can't fix
No.
that problem. So
We-
we're doing the best we can.
We are doing, this whole concept of Monomoy family idea and feeling does help fix that.
Right.
But any of those things, I'm just really grateful for. I love seeing these things. I just can't resist putting in my plug.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Questions? Ms. Games?
Yes, I am looking at next steps at page 9. So looking at the list, of course, Equity Task Force jumps out in my mind. So I'm just kind of wondering, in partnering with the work of the Equity Task Force, some of this appears to me like civil rights organizations, things like
Yeah.
that. Going to partner in?
That would be excellent, yes.
Okay.
So this is the list we received from the state, so
Yep.
those are the people they want us to consult with, so we're developing a plan to do just that.
Excellent.
Thank you.
All right, wonderful.
Anybody else? Okay. So you come back to us with your community engagement plan and more finalized thoughts of what's going to happen?
It's our application, I'm sorry.
So the application is due by October 4th, so all
Yep.
of this has to happen within the next 3 months.
Yeah.
Get on it,
What else are we gonna do over the summer?
right? You have nothing else to do in the summer
Yeah,
on Cape Cod.
exactly.
Are
Yeah,
we
'cause-
seeing anything for the Esser before the application goes in, or you're just gonna let us know once application's in and status?
Well, I think, we worth coming back and just giving you an overview of where we are with the stakeholder engagement. And I don't see and before we submit the application, it would make a lot of sense to come back and just outline what the plan is.
Dr. Carpenter?
And then one of the things that, that Mark and Michael and I have been at least consistent in talking with the rest of the admin team is that the list that you saw is, what we're going to be doing year one, and the expectation is that we're evaluating how those are working in year one, to guide our decisions on should there be a year 2 or year 3, because, the money only goes so far, and I think I may have mentioned to the committee earlier, nothing like, tell the administrative team, here we have about $2 million of federal money that's coming in to support us helping close gaps, and getting, $4 million worth of ideas. And, so we're gonna have to, be strategic about what's working and what's not, giving us the bang for the buck as we move forward and say, okay, do we continue doing after-school programs in year 2 and 3? Do we continue doing an, English language learner program in the summer? Like, where do we bank that? And, part of that's gonna be looking at, the data that comes back from what's happening.
Thank you. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Is this something we would behoove us to vote on when the plan is more finalized before you submit the application, so the end of September meeting? Or is that something that we approve without objection, something along that lines, or it's a lot of money that
Yeah.
we're spending? It'll come, yeah. I think it's something that we should kind of approve, look
Yeah.
over, just to kind of make sure that we're okay
We-
with, because like I said, it's a lot of money,
Yeah.
so.
And
okay.
it wouldn't hurt for us to have, as part of our stakeholder engagement, it'd be good to have this, be
What
able
kind
to
of
put
stakeholder?
applications saying it's fully supported by the school committee or.
Ms. Games?
Yeah, Nisi, I would agree with exactly what you're saying, Madam Chair, because when we go to our budget cycle next, that will probably be a question that people will ask us, and I think we probably would be best served to actually vote on it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and that way then the question comes, well, why did you spend it on this and not
Yeah.
this? And then we can confidently say, well, because X, Y, and Z. So, yeah, we can look to that, I guess, end of September, because it's due the 4th of
yeah.
October. Okay, thank you.
Good.
Okay, next up is the superintendent's recommendation regarding assessment with regard to the elementary operating budget. So superintendent means Dr. Carpenter.
So let me just share with you some things that you should find in your packets, just so that we can have a productive conversation and set the stage for you to both have homework and lots of reading material for our next meeting. But one of the things that was really clear to me is that we have a new school committee member in terms of Danielle, and how do we have a conversation about updating the regional agreement when everybody in the room has been involved in this conversation except one, and some of us have been involved in the conversation, and it's been over 2 years old, and may have forgotten things. Not that Terry has forgotten anything. But
What did you say?
Oh, you're talking to me.
So to start with, there is a copy here that has signatures on the back that is the regional agreement that we currently operate under, so that, so that we at least know what we're starting from. The next is something that we have been working on for, it's now feeling like 5 years, but it's a slowly morphing red line version of things that we've identified in the regional agreement that should be updated, and a lot of that was just removing stuff that had, that was pertinent when the district was coming together, but there were some small things that we were suggesting that should change. I personally, I start glazing over when I look at red line versions, and I just find them very confusing. So what I tried to do is put together this multicolored document that takes the red line version, and anytime we're changing something, I try to just say, here's the section, and here's what we were trying to accomplish and why. So for purposes of today, we're just going to focus on the yellow. But I had mentioned before that DESE has given us feedback on our regional agreement, and there are some sections in lilac or whatever color you would call this, blue, that we should consider adopting. There's one spot, as I was spending far too much time in the document, that I think we can delete, that it's now obsolete given where we are with regionalization. But let's focus on the yellow, because the yellow is really getting into, yeah, so the yellow is the recommendation that's pertinent here, and getting into that elementary equity in terms of finance conversation that we have been having all year. And also, there's aspects of that predate this year when it comes to capital. So I want to sort of walk through the yellow parts in the multicolor document, and you can cross-reference to the red line if you wish, or the non-redlined, your choice. So if we go to the second page of the multicolored document, talks about a section that we should have a revision under budget. And to set the stage for this, if we want to look at a more equitable approach at the elementary level, where the towns are largely paying for the cost of the elementary schools, one of the things that we have to be cognizant of is that we offset our budget with school choice monies. So we have school choice revenue that comes in, and that school choice revenue gets taken off the top of our budget because we pay for staffing positions out of that. If we want to say that we're going to be having some sort of budgetary shift, we want to be clear and transparent to our towns that we're not taking all of this school choice revenue and just applying it to offset Harwich Elementary School's budget or just Chatham Elementary School's budget, but that we're equitably taking that revenue and spreading it between the schools. So the first section here is to add a place within the budget clause of the regional agreement that basically says that, that the budget would be prepared net of school choice revenue, and that school choice revenue would be proportionally allocated to offset each school's budget based on the school's average ratio of enrollment for the preceding 3 years as we report out to DESE. So basically, if Chatham Elementary School is a fifth of the district's enrollment, that a fifth of the school choice revenue should go towards Chatham Elementary School. And if Harwich Elementary School is 2/5, it's not, but that 2/5 is going that direction. So it's a way to at least make sure that we're being clear and transparent with our towns, that there is this revenue source that we use outside of the budget, and we are equitably apportioning it amongst the two elementary schools and the middle school and the high school.
I have a, might be so- Thank you. He's still acting like chair, I took it. I just have a question about your example that you just used, and this could be a really silly question, but, you're saying that if, equitably, if Chatham has 1/5, you're saying if they has 1/5 of the school choice children, it
No,
gets
if they have 1/5 of the enrollment, so it's.
Oh, it's 1/5 of the enrollment, it would get 1/5 of the school, of the.
Of the money.
So, but what if Chatham has more school choice students than Harwich?
I think it's where you start getting into the weeds on that. So let's say Chatham Elementary has more school choice students, and then
I mean, I don't think it's gonna happen, but.
4 years later, they become middle school choice students. It's trying to just balance it out based on where all children are, not necessarily where the school choice children are, because the school choice children come and go and ultimately move across buildings.
There'll be no deficit on either side because of
Right.
the number of school choice children in any school. It's just
Yeah.
how you're allotting that money.
Yeah, so.
Based
and-
on the assessment.
Yeah, and, I will acknowledge that you could go deep into the weeds and try to come up with some complicated way about doing this. I think this is sort of clear, easy to explain, easy to understand, and trying to be as equitable with a revenue source that the district has. And keep in mind that, that there are times where, at a grade level at Chatham, that we might have space for school choice, or there are times that we are closing down school choice because we've reached those class sizes close to 18, and we're diverting kids over to Harwich. And, and again, is it fair that we've pushed the kids to Harwich and now Harwich is getting that? This way, it's everybody's benefiting from the monies, and it's benefiting, the revenue that's coming in is being allocated based on the number of total students in each one of those school buildings.
Thank you.
And Chair, I can just add, it will also help to keep it relatively consistent year to year, so we don't see big jumps in assessments due to change in school choice numbers, and also when we're evaluating how budgets have changed, it'll kind of be hidden in there if it's due to school choice offsets changing, so it'll be better if we keep it consistent.
So we felt it would be important because when Michael and I have been in meetings with the town managers and finance directors, a lot of times they'll ask, well, if you take this approach, how are you going to take into account school choice? I mean, they're very aware that we have this revenue stream, so how are we making sure that we're equitably spreading it out? And this, I think, provides the most equitable way of spreading school choice amongst each of the schools based on how many students actually attend the school. So if we can understand that one, we'll jump to the far more complex piece, which is the big whopping amount of yellow on page 3. So the next section here deals with method of assessing costs to the regional school district. And since December, I have been recommending that we look at having each town pay for its own elementary schools' operating costs. And had the district been doing this since year 1, each year Harwich would have benefited. And it's purely a simple economic principle. It's the economies of scale. The smaller a school building, the more expensive it's going to be per student to operate. And the way our regional agreement is set up is that our regional agreement is blind to economies of scale and just takes the costs and splits it based on the 3-year rolling average of foundation enrollment, which hasn't been fair if we just look at per pupil costs at Chatham Elementary relative to Harwich Elementary. So this is an attempt to go and provide a more equitable approach. Thanks to Charles Gruska, our behind-the-scenes district researcher, Charles happened to find something that I couldn't find, which was a region that actually does exactly what the superintendent had suggested in December. And so what you'll find also in your packet is the complete regional agreement for the school district known as Mount Greylock Regional. Now, the only thing in this that we're recommending we adopt into our agreement is how Mount Greylock goes about their assessment. So Michael put together he took the assessment method that Mount Greylock uses and did a red line approach to go and replace the Mount Greylock wording with wording that would be pertinent to us. The red line version is incorporated into this big amount of yellow, and I will gladly yield the mic to Michael to explain the advanced calculus on how Mount Greylock goes about this.
You have 2 minutes, go.
All right, it's very high level, but essentially what Mount Greylock does is what we recommended, and actually some of the examples when we were doing the budget and assessment had examples of what it might look like when we assess the towns if we applied to each town the cost of their elementary school. So essentially, at a really high level, that's what Mount Greylock method does. What complicates it is there are a couple of elements which we just kind of ignored when we made that change, one of which is revenue. So we just took revenue off the top. So we get money from the state for Chapter 70 aid, and we get Medicaid, and we have the excess and deficiency. And we just took that off the top of the budget, and then we took out the elementary school budgets and apportioned them. What the Mount Greylock, that's the one. What they do is that they take that revenue and apportion it out. They do some to each elementary school and some to the rest of the regional costs. So they take that. So they take that off of what each town will apply at the elementary school level and at the district level, and they apply different percentages to that. The next thing they did differently was the minimum local contribution. So minimum local contribution is what the state says each town must spend, and the state says that has to be the first thing that has to be part of your assessment. You have to say each town will pay its minimum local contribution. So what this approach does is that they say, okay, but we're going to apply that as well to each elementary school and regional costs. So that when it comes to apportioning the cost of the elementary schools, first you take off the revenue that's apportioned to that school. Then you say that the town is going to pay the minimum local contribution that applies to just that school. And then anything over that, the town has to pay. With me so far? Does that kind of make sense? So it's still just paying for the elementary school. It's just when we dealt with minimum local contribution and revenue, we dealt with it up here before we even get into this. This method brings that down and applies it at a school and regional basis. So all the math's in there. That means, so basically what you have is, you have the minimum local contribution amount, and then you have the amount over the minimum local contribution, because that's what's left after the paid minimum local contribution at the school and at the regional district level costs. So that's it. That's essentially it. You have the minimum local contribution and then the above minimum local contribution by school.
So,
I know.
Yeah, we
anybody
test
else
on
have-
this later.
Well, yeah. May I ask a question, please? So when so we would take, I'm trying to put it
Yeah.
into, so I think at our next lesson,
We'll have
you need to bring
slides.
an actual budget and break it down.
Yeah,
for me.
yeah.
For my
So
brain
there is
anyway.
an actual the summary in your pack, I
red
think.
line
Did we
version?
include the pack, the
Which one?
the
Mount Greylock?
summary? You know, one of
Oh.
our assessment summaries that, maybe it didn't make it. All right, well, I will
That's what
circulate
I
that.
was, that's
Yeah.
how my brain works, is to
Yeah.
actually see how the numbers
To
work.
work
But
the numbers.
My main question was, all right, so if you have our $40 million budget, you would take the minimum local contribution off of that.
Yep.
And so you're working from that number, and then
Yep.
that number is gonna be broken down by school.
In our current method,
No, in the proposed.
so
Is the minimum local contribution, my understanding of what I'm reading is that
Yep.
the minimum local comes off first.
of each individual school.
No, this says the district.
So it does, so you do pay for that, but when they're calculating what portion, when they're calculating the above minimum local contribution at each school, you have to take off the minimum local contribution to work out what the above minimum contribution is at the school level.
So you would take
So
our
if you-
$40 million budget and
Yep.
break it down by 4 schools
Yep.
and region.
Actually, so you do it by two, you do it by 2 schools, elementary schools, and then regional costs, which are,
Okay, so 3 schools, or 2 schools and a regional cost.
Yes, that's the one.
So you have 3 categories.
Yep.
And then those 3 categories will be reduced by required minimum contribution.
Yep.
And
Revenue.
then revenue.
yep,
And then, okay.
then that's what's left. So then you pay that extra piece minimum local contribution by each school, and then you go back and you add on the minimum local contribution, and that's what you're talking about, because you've got to get that minimum local contribution totally added up.
Right. And then with the regional cost, that would still be, I didn't finish reading, I
Yeah.
apologize, but that would be the 3-year rolling enrollment average, or
Yep.
foundation enrollment?
Yep,
Is that would still maintain that? Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Dr. Carver?
We could, while we're talking about something a little, in the next little piece of this, have maybe Jim go get the spreadsheet projected.
I can just send it.
Yeah,
Well, I don't
you
know if
want.
my brain might explode with both of
Yeah.
those pieces, but at some point I need
But
to
but we
see numbers.
but we did walk through an assessment so that, so that you can see
Yeah,
how
that's-
it operates.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have questions for Michael or Scott? Okay.
So-
We're gonna move on to the next.
So just, so I guess the thing is, why Mount Greylock? And, the important thing here is, we want to go to DESI and get to a yes. And here's an agreement that they have approved. So for the last 4 years, this has been approved by DESI. It's been operating well there. So we want to take something that's been approved and know we can get that through with DESI. And, so that's why we went with, I think the Mount Greylock's a good way to go about this. But definitely it involves sort of more calculation behind the assessment sheet. Okay, the next, yes, sir.
question on, and I think it's going to come via the model that Michael might put up. Mount Greylock, there's something that occurred there that models Harwich Elementary and Chatham Elementary.
Exactly.
Recently.
Yes, I'm
Yeah.
plugged in. Yep.
So it's a school district that determined that it would be most equitable for both towns if they paid for their own elementary school.
Yep.
So not a new district with a new regional agreement, an established
Right,
district
an
who
established,
updated.
yeah, an
their
established
regional
district 58 years into it, that they
Wow.
decided this would be better
That's good,
for
that's
us. So the next little piece here deals with capital. And here, to let you know where we're going with capital and the conversations that we've had, if we go to the red line version on page 8 and 9 deals with capital costs and debt service. Ever since the last iteration of our red line version, this has been like sticking in the back of my head as not what we intended to achieve. And in fact, DESE, when they asked for feedback from us, came back with a comment that the debt service as it was laid out here didn't quite make sense. So the intent that we have had amongst ourselves and that we've talked with our select boards and our finance committee members with is that at the elementary level, if there is the need to go have borrow for building a new roof, let's say at Chatham Elementary School, that the costs of that are incurred by the town that owns the building, not that we find the town of Harwich paying for roughly 70% of the roof on Chatham Elementary School. The way the red line version, when it went to our lawyer and came back to us, it was one of these classic lost in translation things. So what happens here is under the debt service in the red line version, it basically says that if it happened before July 1st, 2017, then the town, who owns the elementary school pays for it, but not if it happened after. There was sort of a lost in translation. So what I have done, and I have one error in the multicolored thing, debt service on page 5 should be yellow. And, so the only thing that really is applicable when it comes to debt service for the district now is that we have a high school debt. So I think when we started conversations about the regional agreement, there was still some residual debt at the middle school that the town of Chatham had. That's all been paid off. So there's just debt on the high school. And the debt on the high school, this is following the way the regional agreement is currently written, is that the debt on the high school would be assessed using the 3-year rolling average of the town's foundation enrollment. So that's staying consistent. What the red line version does under capital is that capital gets defined, and think of it as capital moving forward. Capital gets defined as anything capital, including buying land to build something, doing a major renovation, building a new building, building an addition on something, and any sort of borrowing costs and architectural costs, that all shows up in this capital definition. So this is where there should be if it happens at the middle school and high school, then it should be on the 3-year rolling average of enrollment. And if it happens at the elementary level, then it should be a portion to the town that owns the building. So in the yellow section where you see capital costs, there is that tweak to the wording where it falls in the right place to get at what we've been talking about for the last couple of years and what we've been talking about with our partners. And then my only suggestion is under the the D that I didn't make as yellow, it should be yellow, that is, that we're just sort of redefining that the debt service is debt service on the high school, and that would be the way to move it forward, sort of consistent with what we've been saying, and then consistent with the recommendation that I've had on the, how do we get to the assessment? And I think Mount Greylock provides a useful model. So I'll stop there, because I think where we go next in the next agenda item sort of blurs into this.
Any questions thus far?
Just a
Ms. DeGratlong?
clarification. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jack.
I just have a question. Do we have, I know that we have the Select Board and Finance Committee working group, but do we have a regional agreement subcommittee? And with the workings of the regional agreement going forward, I'm wondering if we probably should put together a subcommittee, if this is going to be, never mind. Item 12.
Yep.
But as I say, let's wait and see what that next conversation, and then potentially, but. I'm sorry, Ms. Russell.
Just as a further understanding of our real issue here, and I think I understand that you have tripped over the solution to it. Take, for example, formerly Chatham High School. And we identified several years ago that X year it needs $1 million roof. The way I understood it, and I was reminded by Jeff 3 or 4 years ago, that what a good deal, because the way it reads, and I've read it and I see it, that 75 or about percent of the new roof at Chatham building, which they still own, will be paid for by Harwich.
At the middle school.
Yes, at the middle school.
Under,
Not high school.
Under this, at the middle school.
Yeah.
Just as if we had to have a big borrowing thing, let's say, in what's come up in the strategic, or in the, not strategic plan, in the capital plan, is that we're almost 10 years into a $1 million turf field that has a 15-ish year life expectancy. So that if we had to do something big at the high school, that it would still be that 3-year average of rolling, enrollment, that it wouldn't be Harwich is paying for the big projects at high school and Chatham's paying for the big projects at the middle school, but because those buildings are regional, fully regionalized buildings, that 3-year rolling average of enrollment would apply to them.
You good, Terry?
Yeah.
Ms. Gaines?
Yeah, I just have a question, if you have the answer. First of all, I really appreciate this Mount Greylock example. It's really good. And do you have any idea between these two elementary schools what the enrollment ratio is?
I don't, but I can go have that for our next meeting.
I think that would be good, because I anticipate that might be a question by someone, so I think it might be helpful just to have that data.
Yeah, there are also things that are in the Mount Greylock agreement that we didn't do. So Mount Greylock deals with capital differently, and I was at the Harwich Selectmen's meeting this past Monday, and Don Howell was asking about a long-term solution. And, and I think this addresses things that I personally think are in the superintendent's and school committee's wheelhouse. We can look at a per pupil cost and say, this per pupil cost at this elementary school is higher than that one. If you look at the Mount Greylock agreement, they don't deal with capital based on a 3-year rolling average of enrollment. They look at valuation of property in towns, and they look at other things beyond enrollment. And, again, that's I think not mine nor ours to bring up and try to broker, but that's 2 select boards and 2 finance committees that I think that's in their wheelhouse. But we, so Michael and I were very clear, we've been talking about capital a particular way. We stuck with it. We didn't grab Mount Greylock's, it's like, a bridge too far at the moment, but here's sort of the consistent discussion that we've been having.
Right, okay, thank you.
Oh, Danielle?
I'd like to add, if you could provide a little bit more of a snapshot of this district,
Sure.
in addition to the enrollment numbers, but just giving us a picture of, like you mentioned how long they've been in existence. I think that's interesting, and anything else that can kind of give us some context for what is working well in the district with this new, with the way that they're assessing their costs would be helpful.
I saw a hand over here out of the corner of my, Mr. Osceola.
Just on the question of ratio, we might be able to make a guess based on how they vote. They don't have 8 members in the 2-town with 6 votes. They have 7 members, each person having 1 vote, with 4 votes in one town and 3 votes in the other. So that might give us a clue as to how the proportions are, usually because vote follows numbers.
Ms. Everett-Long?
I was gonna say, I just did a quick Google search, and it actually, let's see, Williamstown, Mass. It's a public middle school and high school. So it doesn't look like they actually have elementary schools.
I think,
Unless I'm reading it wrong.
Ms. Gaines?
but I think it's listed unless I misread this. Now, I will admit I didn't read it, but I thought they had an elementary.
So it's part of the Williamstown Lanesboro Public Schools. Mount Greylock Regional School is a public middle school and high school in Williamstown, Massachusetts.
Okay. I'm just looking at their regional agreement, page 3, location of regional district schools.
Yep.
It says Williamstown Elementary School and Lanesboro Elementary School. So I think, I don't know if that's maybe their regional,
Yep,
anyway.
Yeah.
So,
yep.
so
Dr. Carpenter?
my crack researcher, Miss Jordan, has texted me that one of the
Way better a crack one than me.
one of the schools has an enrollment of 189. The other has an enrollment, the elementary school, and the other has an enrollment of 376. So it's
There we are.
All right, thank
so
you.
you've got again an economy of scale issue, and and I personally think there are regions statewide that have economy of scales issues. They just don't realize they have economy of scale issues.
Or they just don't deal with them.
Or they don't deal with them because dealing with it gets messy.
Then you get 6 packets.
With a lot of colors and a lot of
Lots of
headlines.
colors.
I just drove through Williamstown about 5 hours ago, heading this way.
You should have picked up some information for us.
I was just taken with Williams College.
Should have gone into Greylock, got us a little brochure.
Yeah, I should have.
Any
Next time.
other questions before we get our math tutorial?
Do you want to do this?
I would love for you to do that.
All right, so this is a regional agreement.
Can you make
This
it a little bigger,
assessment.
though?
Yes, I'm going to. So I just wanted you
I-
to see, it's similar to what we've done in the past. So if you can just make that section that starts with the operating budgets.
Is it blurry or is it me?
I think
Goes
it's,
back up.
I think
There you
it's
go.
all
Yeah,
of
keep
us.
going, there you go.
It's 9 o'clock
I
at
mean,
night.
I'm just kind of going like this, like maybe it's me.
No.
Open is going to be less.
Like that's almost better.
Do it again.
Yeah,
It's better.
looks like a snapshot of a piece of paper or something. It kind of
All
blurs
right, is
out.
that there you go.
That is better though.
Yeah.
Bigger's better.
Yep. Can we see it? Can you see everything there?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
So, I want to walk up there a bit. So the operating, so as you can see, it starts by breaking down the operating budgets, and you have the Harwich Elementary School, Chatham Elementary School, and just for easiness of reference, underneath the picture is the regional budget. And so right now that includes both the middle school and the high school and all district costs. You then use the 3-year foundation enrollment ratios at each school. So 25% of the foundation enrollment is at Harwich, 8% is at Chatham, and whatever's underneath there is, it's like 66% is at the middle schools and high school. And that's the percentage you use to break out the general fund revenue and state aid by budget, right? So you start with those budgets, and then you get down to the operating budget for each of those buckets, after revenue. All right, so set that aside for a second. Then, and this is kind of what you were saying, Nancy, so then you start with the minimum local contribution, which is what is set by the state. But then in order, then you have to identify the above minimum local contribution by school. Because that's what you're going to charge to each town. You're going to charge them the minimum local contribution in total, then you're going to charge them the above minimum local contribution by school. So first of all, you identify the above minimum local contribution at each elementary school. And it's based on, it's very, well, I was going to say it's a little confusing. It's very confusing because for the first part of this, you use the foundation enrollment ratios of those grades in the town. So what percentage of Harwich's students are at the pre-K through 4, that's what determines the portion of the minimum local contribution that offsets the Harwich Elementary School. Here, can I just walk up here? So see this number here, this 34%, that's because 34% of the Harwich students are pre-K through 4. So you take 34% of the minimum local contribution and assign that to the elementary school, and that leaves you on 1.6 million, which is the above minimum local contribution for the Harwich Elementary School. And then you do the same thing for Chatham. And then, so that's how you, so this operating assessment is the minimum contribution plus that portion of the elementary school budget above that minimum contribution, plus the portion of the 5 through 12 costs, that's all the middle school and high school costs, also above minimum contribution. At this time, if you use the enrollment ratio, the 3-year average grade 5 to 12 enrollment ratio to split up, see these numbers do add up to 100 now, because we're now just splitting up the regional district costs to each school. Are you saying?
No, I am. He was bringing up a percentage point from years ago. Is that your question?
So I understand the second part, but when you were talking about the 34 and the 35, I was thrown off by 35 being so big. Could you tell me, that's not 30, Chatham doesn't have 35% of their population that are school-age children, right?
No.
So what is that?
35% of Chatham students are pre-K through 4.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Foundation
Okay.
enrollment. So money in
Yeah.
the school is the foundation enrollment. Different number for district enrollment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Makes more sense now for me.
Yeah.
Sorry, Danielle.
So what happens, if anything, if Harwich students choose to go to Chatham Elementary or vice versa? Now, is that, where does that fall?
So it doesn't make sense.
Okay.
Because, so there's two things. One is foundation enrollment. So foundation enrollment is all the students who live in the town that attend public schools or charter schools. So it doesn't include, if you go to private, it includes any of your name, no matter where they're being educated, if they're being educated by a public school, through school choice, it's still included in foundation enrollment. So whether they go to Harwich or Chatham, or Nauset for that matter, or somewhere else, or later they're still included in that foundation enrollment number. And this pupil enrollment ratio is also based on where you live, rather than just school, but you have to get from the district schools.
Any other questions?
I'm hoping the silence means, oh, you'll get it, it all makes total sense. No.
It'll be 3 times the charm here.
Yeah.
I might need to bring it home, but yes,
Yeah.
it definitely makes more sense seeing it.
So
right
next
now.
time, I promise to have some nice slides, moving bits
Can we
and
have like a
things.
roadmap?
Yes,
Yeah.
Some arrows,
Roadmap.
Exactly.
some color, yeah, that'd be good. Thank you.
Talk to Mark, he's good at those.
Yeah.
Actually, the roadmap.
Yeah, thank you. Tina,
Oh,
thank
that's
you
right.
so much.
Yes.
The roadmap was mine.
That's right,
Michael,
sorry.
could
It
you
was
just
his.
bring
Yep.
the punchline that the spreadsheet gets to, is you didn't get down to the punchline?
Yes.
That's the thing that,
I was actually wondering that, but I didn't know if it was there or not.
So it's about, so remember, these numbers will change, because this is based on this year's budget, which will never be applied to this formula, because this will be next year's budget. And also, the foundation enrollment numbers are not easily, we want to break them down by grade, and that's not easily done. So that will also, that's something Desi's helping us with. But with all those provisos, it moved around $550,000 from Harwich's assessment to Chatham's assessment. Which, if you remember from all our previous presentations, is really close to what the number we've always said.
That's crazy.
Because, there are slight changes because the percentages you're applying to these figures is what's changing, but you're still just dealing with the same numbers. We're still just down with the budget, the revenue's not changed, and the minimum local contribution's not changed. You're just slightly changing what percentages you apply to them. But there's not huge differences at each level, so that's how you end up with the same number. It's like we have this joke, every time we do this calculation, we come up with kind of the same number.
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
That's not bad.
It's kind of, yeah, exactly.
It's kind of rewarding. Dr. Carpenter?
just one quick disclaimer. What we did not do and did not borrow from the Mount Greylock agreement is their page 16.
Yeah.
So their page 16 is how they go about apportioning the Chapter 70 aid, which uses some sort of regression analysis based on what things would have been, and it takes into account equalized valuations in both towns, and it gets far more complicated than you actually need to get to accomplish the task at hand on more equitably breaking out costs. But
That looks like fun.
But if people on the Finance Committee want to really go for some regression analysis and end up, I'm guessing, pretty much where Michael ended up with here.
They might go through the exercise. Mr. Russell?
A couple of thoughts strike me, Michael, good job. And first of all, I think all of us need to take this home for homework because of the hour, because of just us. Secondly, I like the idea Jackie brought up a half hour ago, that if there isn't let's look at this committee to either educate ourselves, now there's 3 or 4, or is this the bailiwick of the finance committee, the sub-finance committee to do? It's interesting, for 2 or 3 years, some of us have been kicking this around, and Scott would come up with a number, and how amazing, how close it is to the issue of how it is used the word subsidy in Chatham to support their kids is about what we've been talking about. My question, assuming we all understand this, minus page 16 of Greylock, we look towards getting in a year or two this type of agreement, a knowledge base raised in Chatham and Harwich, and the vote is a positive one. Would this regional change make the problem go away? Meaning, let both elementary schools pay for their own costs? Yes, maybe a little bit, no.
So it will get at fiscal equity at the elementary level. I think that clearly from the conversation from some selectmen in Harwich when I was there on Monday, I think there are some concerns about the regional agreement that are beyond our privy or our wheelhouse, and that's where I think you need, we can help facilitate, but at the end of the day, I think finance committees and select boards need to discuss, is there something long-term that needs to be addressed, and that could be the next iteration of a regional agreement review. I think that everything that's in the multicolored packet addresses what we have talked about accomplishing in this 10-year review, and I think let's see how that goes, and then is there something different that needs to happen beyond that, you know, I think that's what people are gonna have to wrestle with, and that's where, you know, the challenge with our regional agreement and many, I would say virtually all regional agreements in the state, is that minimum required contribution, which covers about half of the bill, is fully based on enrollment. And that's why we do, it's like, here's minimum required contribution, here's how foundation enrollment, that they all track right over each other because it's all very enrollment driven. And then everything else, all the rest of the costs in our regional agreement is also enrollment.
Yeah.
You know, so there's nothing about our regional agreement or most regional agreements in the state of Massachusetts that takes into consideration anything about two communities other than just the enrollment of the kids that go to the school. And there are many communities, including the one I came from before coming here, that there's some fiscal and demographic inequities or differences between the two towns that created some tension in the marriage when it came to finance. And again, I think ours might be the role of being the mediator in that conversation, but I don't think it's ours to go and come up with the solution on how to fix it.
I say it in a personal way because as I look at the original document, as some of you know, my son was on this original committee. So I've had debates with him as to how come one of 7 or 8 with Jeffrey, et cetera. How come no one on that committee said, what if the bottom fell out at Harwich Elementary? Would Chatham be, in that, it's been 9 years or 10 years, but that never came up. It never came up as to a preventive way that possibility, but here's a way out of this. And I am struck with, in what you're saying, there may very well be other regions that have either ignored it or they've moved through it. Okay, good. I'm a little bit up to speed, a little bit.
Do you want to comment on that, or?
I mean, I was just going to, I'm essentially just reiterating what the superintendent said, but the trend in the assessments is driven by foundation enrollment. And this proposal doesn't fundamentally change that. So the trend will continue. We'll just have this drop in year 1. So if you imagine the assessment for Harwich has been going up at this trend, it will drop $500,000, but the trend will continue in the same direction. So you'll still, those percentage changes that we've seen will continue because it's about enrollment. It's just will be a lower amount. So how long that buys us, everyone will be delighted year 1 because the assessment will change significantly, but year 2, even though it'll be a lot lower, it will go back to those same percentage increases.
Mr. Asiala? Your mic is...
I asked a similar question about the regional agreement. What did they do to anticipate corrections or amendments and so forth? And there is an amendment procedure here, which is very good that you do need one. And there is the requirement that you review every 5 years or take a look at and see how you fine tune. But the question that I was asking, what did they think about, or how did they anticipate, or what were they going to do if the enrollment numbers drop out, really decline in Chatham Elementary School? And what I concluded, or what I came to realize, I guess, is they didn't think that way. It was not the question they asked. They didn't look at that framework. The regional agreement is built on the foundation that there are schools in the Monomoy district. There's a high school, a middle school, and 2 elementary schools that are Monomoy entities. Not a Monomoy elementary school, but Monomoy entities, 2 schools that are Monomoy schools. One of them happens to be located in Chatham, one is in Harwich, and we'll keep an elementary school in each town. But the understanding seemed to be these are part of the Monomoy district, end stop. And a new consideration arises when like a scissors that opens, the financial aspect diverges so much and places such a burden on one of the two towns that a perceptional shift occurs with the financial, which is, wait a minute, maybe this isn't Monomoy so much, this is this is Chatham, this is Harwich, because the monies come from that town and the schools are in that town. So what we're seeing now is kind of a departure from the concept of Monomoy, somewhat. And it has to be a departure, I'm afraid, from that concept, because to maintain it means maintaining a fiscal formula that is just too disadvantageous to the town of Harwich and cannot continue going forward. But it's a little bit of a loss of the concept of Monomoy. Yes, it'll be one superintendent and one director of curriculum instruction and assessment. Yes, and there'll be one teacher association, and the rules will cover both. But there's a little bit of a loss of the sensibility that this is a regional district that includes 4 schools. It's clearer now we have a high school that's Monomoy, a middle school that's Monomoy, and to an increasing extent, elementary schools are defined by town. That's the trend, that's the shift in thinking that I see from today to about 10 years ago. And I would imagine that that shift in thinking will only accelerate coming out of our colleagues in Harwich. Fun times to come.
Danielle, I have a question. I'm recognizing this conversation has been happening long before I joined. I wonder, did that shift actually ever happen where each town considered their elementary school to be a Monomoy elementary school? I don't think it was ever called that, but it seems culturally that each town retained their sense of identity and ownership of their town. And I wonder if that initial intention of seeing these as 2 Monomoy elementary schools actually ever came to fruition. And I think that might be some of the tension that I'm hearing Mr. Auciello speak of. And I wonder, I'm just asking if that actually ever happened.
So I can speak a little to that because my daughter was in kindergarten the year before regionalization and was in 1st grade the first year. And so her experience through elementary school, and then my son, he's 4 grades behind. So I watched that, and there actually was I'd say, a concerted effort and success in going from Chatham Elementary School, being Chatham Elementary School as a part of Chatham Public Schools, into Monomoy. And it took a few years for, the teachers and the administration to kind of develop that kind of program, but slowly things started going away from Chatham Elementary School to Chatham Elementary School Monomoy Sharks. And so I really do feel there was a melding of the elementary schools kind of into the district over the course, specifically over the course of my daughter's time, because she was there for the first 4 years of the district. And I believe, were they the first class that came together as 5th graders at the middle school? So Joyce, his daughter and her son and my daughter all in the same grade. So they were the first class of 4th graders to go into Monomoy Middle School as together. Whereas, Tina, your daughter was in the middle school and Rory they were as 5th graders at Chatham Middle School, 6th graders at Chatham Middle School, and then 7th graders as Monomoy Middle School. So, just my personal experience of watching what happened and also being a part of the committee for that whole time as well, so I was able to see both sides of it. The schools do retain their own identity, and they do retain that Chatham Elementary, Harwich Elementary name, but the transition from it being Chatham Elementary School to Monomoy Public Schools, Chatham Elementary School, Monomoy Sharks, that all happened. So, Sharon, I saw your hand.
Yes, so I don't disagree with what you're saying, because what you're addressing is what the experiences of the children going through and the teaching staff. But I would say that my dad was principal of that Main Street school. I worked with him from the time I graduated from high school on trying to have, at the beginning it was Harwich, Chatham, Brewster. And the initial plan that was being looked at that time was where Stop and Shop is. And so there's been this history, and then when we had the votes, Brewster fell away into Nauset. But when we had the votes, it mostly, one time Chatham did vote for it, but mostly Harwich was for this, and Chatham had a hard time with that. I can't speak about reasons, but in the towns of people that have gone traditionally through the schools, they haven't been in there to see what's going on. So they're still here, the kids are here, the teachers are here. You know, there's just this going on. I'm not saying right or wrong on anything. That's just how it is. So I have great empathy with the group, you know, your son and the whole group that worked on this, because I would be at a lot of those meetings, and to think all of our interest was where things would be and how much it would be and how to get the votes and all that. And then in 1 year, it was, let's get this done after the vote happened and work this out about how this will happen. So there were so many things to be thinking about that it was amazing we did as well. Now we're saying, well, why wasn't that done? Why wasn't this done? But it was really amazingly successful what did get done.
Dr. Carpenter?
So, you know, I'll just provide some background and a cautionary tale. So, ever since I have been here, you've seen me and our business manager start every budget presentation talking about class size guidelines. Now, you all didn't come up with class size guidelines. I came up with the class size guidelines because I watched two different towns, the town of Lincoln and the town of Sudbury, over my 13 years with them. And the town of Lincoln had class size guidelines that are shockingly, or not shockingly, quite similar to what I present every year, and that's how they would start off their presentations. And Lincoln was very much my Chatham from when I was off Cape. They were only 13% of the student population, and that 13% melded in with 87% of kids from Sudbury. The cautionary tale is that Sudbury was fiscally challenged, and as time went on, and the very last thing I did, I felt it was sort of like my last public statement, is at Sudbury's town meeting, I did a sort of retrospective. It's like, here's 13 years ago when I bought into Sudbury as a taxpayer, and this is what the class size, average class size looked like at my high school. And here's, 4 years later when we had kids, this is what the class size went, and the class size kept going up. And it's like, here I am, and it's 13 years later, the class size went from a place that was this supportive, nurturing school district to something that I was very glad to come here, where the class sizes are far more supportive. I think the cautionary tale that we have to think about is that this, I think, is a good step in the right direction at getting at some fiscal equity. But I do think it's important for two town boards and finance committees to have some deeper conversations about what sort of school district do they want to maintain. Because, it's very easy, if a budget keeps getting tighter and tighter and tighter, to see small supportive class sizes start to evaporate. And I think it would have behooved my former district to start to have conversations about something besides just enrollment. because one town was always wondering, sort of like, well, you know, how could we support you and you know, and had the resources, but there wasn't a mechanism in the regional agreement to have that support ever get to the high school, because the regional agreement specified what that assessment is. And I think there will need to be conversations if we're looking in the crystal ball 10 years out. You know, how do we think potentially differently if we want to maintain things? If one, you know, if enrollment continues to shift and starts to head towards an 87-13 split, how do you keep the district having small supportive class sizes that I think has really made us the supportive district we are?
Any other questions or comments? Does that kind of get to your question or point, or not really?
Yeah.
In these,
Yeah.
sorry. I mean, I went, and
Yeah.
I realized that I went the parent and child way going to the school, and I think Sharon was alluding to the towns, you know, the townspeople, correct me if I'm putting words in your mouth, the townspeople that don't have current students or current teacher in any sort of relationship with, that the two towns still see their elementary schools as separate. And I think that once you have a relationship somehow with the schools and you're witnessing what's happening in the schools, then you start to see that they're not as separate, I guess is that? So, yeah.
Just as,
Jackie?
You and I were like, handing back and forth
I know,
tonight.
I'm cute.
I can't.
The only, I know you can't see me, the only thing I would add to that, in reiterating what Nancy's saying, is that a lot of time the outside perspective of the two elementary schools, from my perspective being on the inside and having two kids, having gone through the system, is that oftentimes you only see the differences in the two schools because that's all people are talking about. And one of the biggest things that I see, and I've been spearheading in my own little brain the whole time I've been on the committee, and was an issue when my child was in kindergarten, and it's something I followed closely personally as being on the committee, is the curriculum development and having the curriculum be more streamlined through the two elementary schools. It was one of the things I had the largest issue with. And I'll say in the last 2 years, that is really, it's been a turning point where I see the teachers working as teams, as fifth grade teams, as fourth grade teams, as third grade teams. I'm really excited about the team leader, and now that it's gonna be one teacher for the grade versus one in one school, one in the other. I think that's a huge piece. But just getting, you know, Mark's been doing a great job just streamlining all of our curriculum and making sure that all of our kindergartners are on the same program in the first grade, the second grade, and that takes time. And I think that was one of the biggest separations between the two schools. I mean, besides they have two different principals and they're very different, and each school has very distinct cultural ties to their own community, different traditions, and traditions are hard to break. You know, it's just this year, Harwich did a fourth grade graduation thing outside, Chatham didn't. You know, like that stuff we'll get to, but for me, the big stuff is why we're here. We're an academic institution, and I want my child in the Harwich Elementary School to get the same education that my child in the Chatham Elementary School is getting. So I think that's kind of the behind the scenes stuff that we don't always talk about, but has been a significant change with the elementary schools since we regionalized.
Mr. Russell?
Just quickly, another piece of historical perspective of this, and nothing to do with the Chatham Elementary dilemma right now that we've kicked around, saw 3 years ago, and have been talking for the last couple of years of how to resolve it. This is not new. How Chatham High School had the exact same model with kids 15, 16, 17. For 4 or 5 years, they weren't willing to entertain joining at the time, any type of region, and then the same model but different age kids. The Chatham High School program was costing tremendous amount of money because of scale, because their classes were small, so small, similar to Chatham Elementary now, 10 years ago, that they began to realize that they were losing kids. The school choice kids coming in from Harwich wasn't balancing the money, and the second thing, they weren't able to offer extra AP courses, honors courses, because of the numbers that they were dealing with at 10th, 11th, and 12th grades, which were whatever they were, 15, 10. And so those powers that be said, let's chat with Harwich, because Harwich needs, through their evaluation system, a new high school. Different reason, but kind of the same issue that Chatham was experiencing right now in the elementary. They're losing money, they're losing children, and the less kids, the more money it costs. Just what they experienced 12 years ago at the high school level. And then the same Chatham power brokers experienced that, and they came up with, for us too, a good solution. And now, X number of years later, we're seeing that slippage of population creating the same dilemma, but not, Chatham at least, it was their own money that they were then paying. Now it's Harwich, because of the enrollment, sending over money that normally would be a little bit closer in balance. And did I capture that?
That was good. That was good history. Well done.
Thank you.
All right, so we're moving on to the next very tied-in concept or topic of regional agreement working group future plans. I believe, Ms. Games, you're going to give us an update?
Yep, I'll kickstart this, and I do want to pull in Jackie's suggestion earlier. So,
It's Terry nice.
oh, Terry and Jackie.
Yeah, both bars.
So the regional agreement, as everybody knows, we have a regional agreement, and Danielle, just for you, we pulled together a regional agreement working group, I think back in December, for two purposes. We wanted to, and we've got both town managers, so Harwich and Chatham. We have the finance directors from each town. We have the superintendent, our business manager. We have 2 school committee members from each town, and a member of each select board. And we pulled them together to talk about the financial inequity and also the enrollment issue. And just to start some conversations, because the superintendent alluded to earlier, is that it's not our problem to fix, but somehow we're in the middle of this. And so we had to find a way to bring the 2 towns together. So I had put this on the agenda, the last agenda for me, regional agreement future plans, because one of the things that happened on Monday when the superintendent went in front of the Harwich Board of Selectmen is they just assumed the working group was continuing and appointed their liaison, and it kind of sent a message to me that there is an expectation that we're going to continue these conversations. But with Terry and Jackie's suggestion, originally on your subcommittee, I mean, I stuck it under here because I felt like it was something we still needed to maintain. However, Jackie and Terry bring up a good suggestion on, do we want it to be something else? I mean, we absolutely, based on the presentation we just received on the regional agreement, we have to continue this conversation. There is an expectation that this is going to keep happening. So future plans, I'm just going to propose that we keep the working group in some form, whether it's here, where it's parked now, or whether it spins off and becomes something else, I don't know, but it has to continue. And before our next meeting, which is July 14th, I think there's also an expectation by at least Harwich that we're going to meet to talk about this, what we all got tonight, because it was brought up in the conversation that the superintendent, so there is an expectation that we're going to be talking about this. So we do have to talk about our future plans with the working group. And I believe, superintendent, I believe that we probably need to, before the 14th, have a conversation about this in the working group, because we've got a nice mix of people from both towns, finance, town managers, everybody, the select board, so we can start having a conversation about this. And that's so we do need to have that before the next meeting, of which I would just propose that everybody on the current working group just stays there and stays a part of that conversation, and then we can decide what we want to do going forward. So that'll kickstart maybe where we want to go from there.
Ms. Stout.
I believe you and Terry are the Harwich reps, is that correct?
Currently, yes.
But who are the Chatham perhaps?
Right now, it's Nancy. It was Joanne, but in Joanne's absence, I actually asked Joe to step in, so Joe joined us at the last meeting. And it was my thought that Joe could join us again at the next meeting, because Joanne was a member at that time. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I'm wondering, so typically speaking, in years past, the select board and finance committee kind of reps were more or less the chair and the vice chair, because it was a Chatham and Harwich member, and then we kind of added in alternates just in case, because I believe we had a time where we wanted to attend the meetings more regularly. So I'm wondering if maybe we pull that working group out and let the liaisons for the select board and finance committees stay the chair and the vice chair as, again, representing each town, to kind of lead conversations with the select boards, board of selectmen, and the finance committees. And then maybe, dovetailing on what Terry and Jackie were saying about having a regional agreement / working group as a separate entity, which I think Jackie's volunteering for, because that's, no. I think maybe that would be a good future. I do agree with what you're saying in terms of for now, because we can't really appoint new group until our next meeting and express interest. So I think that if we're going to have a meeting with the towns, with the working group at some point, that we just kind of leave it as you, or Tina, Terry, myself, and Joe to kind of present this, and then maybe we can transition if there's interest in changing things up as a future. Ms. Zebrello.
I was just thinking that might be a little bit redundant. Here's my thought. My thought is that now that I'm fully, I'm just looking at it differently, it may be a little redundant. And my reasoning is, one, your two liaisons, the chair and the vice chair, Chatham and Harwich member, have an established relationship with your select board and your finance committee, are going to and from meetings as needed, liaison, reporting back to the committee. And often it's regular business, but where we're heading into having to do the regional agreement, where those items are going to be talked about hopefully at those meetings, and those liaisons are already going to be there. My thought is that those two would remain on the working group for the regional agreement and be the liaison as they normally would, as kind of, you don't need 4 people at those meetings, you only need 2, but having the additional 2 people at Chatham Harwich be part of that regional agreement working group to help support those 2 liaisons. Because the liaisons serve a role to be the kind of communication line between the boards and our board on various topics, not just this. And I see where it might be good to have a separate group, but I just feel like it's duplicating. So maybe just adding for when you meet about the regional agreement, adding 2 more people in to help support those liaisons and do some of the work when it's specific to the regional agreement. Because otherwise you're gonna have 2 people being the liaison, and most likely those same 2 people we're going to agree to have on the regional agreement with 2 other people. Because typically when we do the subcommittees, it's people that have interest, either, like you said, either interest in the topic, have done it in the past, are familiar with it, it's kind of what they're good at, or for various reasons. So I'm just wondering if we're just going to end up, we're going to come full circle.
Mm-hmm.
Just a thought.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Terry?
I agree with Jackie, and the issue is complex enough, and again, just speaking for myself, the Mount Greylock research was done by Scott and Michael. Being a liaison, if my name was in there, right at the moment and giving me another week, I couldn't really spell exactly what Greylock is telling us. So whatever working group we're kicking around, subtracting, adding, these 2 gentlemen right here are our agents and spokespersons, because this is kind of the first time I've heard this. And it's just, not that there wasn't an earlier moment that there would be a solution possibly, but I think it's a great deal of learning for us without the help of these guys who are living it each day at work.
Ms. Games?
Yeah, and I just want to go back to a point that the superintendent made, and there is still, with however we form this working group, there still is an expectation, perhaps maybe more with one town, is that we're going to lead this effort. We're going to be the mediators, the marriage counselors, if you will. So we have to be prepared to kind of play that role, because I think in my observation in the last few months, I don't know that either town's going to take the initiative. So I think that's where we come in. So I just want to, however we direct this working group, I just want us to be prepared that somebody's going to facilitate it. And I will tell you that in my last 6 months, I guess, of experience with this, 7 months, is that there's also an expectation of balance in this working group. So just as an example, even though I was wearing a hat of chair, being impartial, running the meeting, it was very important by members of both towns that we have equal representation. So even though we've got one Chatham and one Harwich and then the chair, that's not balanced to some people in the working group. So we had to kind of make sure we had 2 and 2. So there are some sensitivities, and I want to be sensitive to those as we kind of work through whatever we're working through, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Ms. Stout?
So a little bit tangent. On these working group meetings, the liaison to the committees, aren't such as much of an issue, but are they open to the public, or other people? Can we go? Will that consider a quorum if too many of us go? Or are people going to report back? Because I'm uncomfortable when something goes on. I kind of understand about negotiations, but in other aspects, I really like to hear back at least what's going on, or be able to attend now and then to know what's going on. Either way.
Mr. Osceola?
I'll try to I want to try and pull together just a few comments that are really more questions. But the first thing is, a working group is not a public body and isn't operating under the same laws. It's an advisory group. It doesn't operate under OML, and it's not a public meeting. It's not open to the public. But anything that comes up is when there is fruition, it's clearly going to be brought about here. It'll clearly come up here, and all of us will have have a chance to have our public say on any questions. But it's just not a public body. I'm not sure if I'm not sure if Harwich really wants a working group. They've made it clear what they want is money. And I don't know, and again, rightly so, but in the meetings I attended, it was hard to miss, because people of significance in the town of Harwich said, what we want is, and I counted it 5 times because it corresponded to a song from the OJs way back when, money, 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 money. It said money 5 times. And somewhere around the 3rd or 4th time, I got the idea. So they really want an end. They need money. I don't see how the school committee can push that forward. As somebody on the Chatham side said, quote, Chatham is the problem. Chatham has to find a way to come up with sufficient monies to satisfy Harwich. Maybe it'll be $500,000, maybe it'll be less, I don't know what, maybe it'll be more I don't know. But we don't control that. We can't do much more than what we've done. I think I would be very happy to hear more about that issue, to see how can we move things forward. I'm not sure that we have the leverage to do it. Perhaps Dr. Carpenter will mention that in just a minute. And finally, I may be, it may be the lateness of the hour, but and then maybe I'm hallucinating a little, but I did think I heard my name mentioned in some fashion here. And I would just say, I think if there is going to be a working group, it really ought to be somebody who's anticipating continuity with the school committee and will be part of this going forward, because this isn't going to be done quickly, I don't think. Although I pray that there will be a select board meeting in Chatham where they say, you know what, these issues are really vital. Harwich is not being treated properly. Let's find a way to give the money to Harwich that they need. I'd love to see that happen, and then all this goes away. But at least in terms of my, I think someone in it should be there for a while. My own plans, you know, I was elected a year ago, and when I was elected, I thought, okay, I'm going to serve out the term, and then at the end of that, just walk away from the school committee, because I see the school committee as kind of public service for grown-ups. You know, it's not just 18-year-olds, but public service for grown-ups. And I thought you do a 5 or 6 year stint, then you impose term limits on yourself and you walk away. And I'm hesitant in saying this because there are people sitting here who have served much, much longer. And I'm not trying to suggest that that's a standard other people should have. It's just my own personal standard. And if you go around saying term limits are a good idea and then you're elected and you keep running for re-election, you have created a looming question about your sense of, I don't know, integrity, I guess. So I'm just thinking somebody going forward should be somebody who's anticipating being on the school committee for a long time, and I just thought I'd finish up my term, and then it's somebody else's turn to take the school, take a position on the school committee. Or at least that's what my thought has been so far, all along.
Dr. Carpenter?
So I do think there is a concrete thing that we can do to move things forward, and that's we were about, prior to COVID, to move forward a final iteration of a regional plan or regional agreement change with both select boards. And we and the select boards all agreed that because of COVID and a want to keep town meetings really short, over a year ago, that we pulled any forward momentum on that regional agreement away. Now, at the time, I hadn't uttered the fiscal equity piece. So I think if we take the multicolored document and send this off to Mark Terry, who's the district's attorney, and have Mark meld the purple, yellow, and orange into the red line document, I think we have what we need to mull and take a vote here. I think a vote in the affirmative from this committee then moves to the select boards, and it motivates the select boards to react, to see if there's support there. Does Harwich want to support what amounts to about $550,000 more funds, or are they going to say, we don't want to support this, we want to shoot the moon and see some radical change? But again, theirs to discuss and react to. But I think until we give the boards a chance to react to something, we don't have an ability for the Chatham board to say, hey, we can go and sell this, or we can't sell this to our town. So I think the next step for us is we need to go and come up with a vote for a finalized regional agreement that we're moving forward, and finally get off these school committees' goals for the year.
Yes, please.
That one thing.
Ms. Games?
Yes, just to clarify what you just said, Superintendent, are you proposing to bypass the work group?
I'm not proposing to bypass the work group. I am somebody who believes that there are things we can do to jumpstart it. I can give this copy to Mark Terry, who I'm sure can, in the course of a couple days, have a modified red line version that he can ship to me and I can send to our towns, and they can go and send to town council to vet, so I think there are things that we can do to jumpstart some things on the town side and our side, while also bringing together that group to educate them so that because I think the magic of the working group is that ideally we're taking, in the case of Harwich, we're taking Mary Anderson and educating her to what this is so that she can try to explain the advanced calculus that Michael just shared with you to her board, and that Jeff Dykins can share it with his board and have somebody feel more confident about answering some questions from their compatriots on their board. But, so I think it's a yes and. I think we can do both. I think we can jumpstart things. But I do think if we don't take a vote on this and come up with a finalized document in July, then any chance of fall town meetings to potentially address it has sailed. In part, Danielle, that after we come up with sort of a final blessing and the selectmen come up with a final blessing, the document needs to get shipped to the Department of Education for the commissioner to sign off on, which is why I think finding an example of something you've already signed off on is, puts us in a good place that they don't just ship it back saying, I'm sorry, this doesn't work. We can just point out, but you signed off 4 years ago with this other, region for something very similar, and we largely borrowed their wording.
Okay. Yeah, because I just wanted to clarify, and thank you for that, because I think it is a yes and, because I think the purpose of the working group is it gets vetted. It gets discussed and vetted so that Mary Anderson, who is now the new liaison for Harwich, and Jeff Dykins have an opportunity to go back and have a voice at their table, as do the two town managers, as do the finance. So everybody's kind of got an understanding, and it's easier to educate or argue, if you will. So I just wanted to make sure. Okay.
And yesterday, Michael started conversations with the two towns about this, the Mount Greylock concept. So, so again, so we're already trying to jumpstart that process.
All right.
So I think the working group still needs to be around.
Yeah.
And I think based on, I'm leaning towards pulling the working group out of that liaison role, because while I understand that it's very similar, I think that it would be helpful to have a specific group to lean on that may not necessarily be the liaisons.
Sorry.
Yes, sir.
Pulling away from?
Pulling
what
the
is-
working
you mean
group.
Deriving from or separating, when you say pulling away?
Separate. So separate that working group liaison out of the select board finance.
Two groups.
Okay.
Yes, so
Okay.
separate, sorry. It made perfect sense in my brain, but my
Madam
brain's
Chair?
tired. Yes,
Is it going to be defined as a work group or a subcommittee?
it's a work group.
Okay, thank you.
Because that's it's defined by the select boards.
Okay.
So I think that for now, if a meeting comes up before our next school committee meeting, we can kind of pull together who was already, because it's already still established, whereas that hasn't been broken down yet. But then I think going forward, we establish a new working group, or if there's repeats, then there's repeats. But does that sound reasonable going forward, or?
It does to me.
I think it sounds great.
Yep, sure.
That's good, because my brain hurts. So we're gonna have a working group, and that's its own little separate category, because it's not a liaison subcommittee or a representative. It's a working group.
And may I ask a question? So
Yes,
you're going
Tina.
to leave it on? Are you leaving it on here, or you want to take it off? Is it something we can sign up for, or do you just want to pull it off the sheet?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, do we leave it as, I mean, if Mr. Osceola does not want to be a part of it, leave it as Tina, Terry, and myself who were on it, and then we pull another Chatham member in, and we just decide that tonight? Does that sound realistic? Is anybody opposed to that?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I think you could probably just do one of each town liaison, if you want to do it that way, because the only reason we added that fourth person was because I was the chair, which was fine. I was trying to be impartial, but there was some sensitivity that there were 2 Harwich people there and only 1 Chatham person. That's why we added the
so if we
fourth.
only did 2
So I think you
people.
only just need 1 of each.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Sharon?
But are there 2 selectmen?
No, one
No,
for
there's
each
Just
one.
one from each, oh.
Yeah, it's 1 each.
All right, that's fine.
Yep.
Well, yes, sir.
Nancy,
I'm happy for somebody to tell me what to do, because I'm tired at this point.
at some point, I said this a month or so ago, and I think I probably was wrong, but I think at some point the working group, and I felt that way a month or 2 ago, had gone as far as it could financially to convince the 2 select boards that, in fact, here's how you get some support for help out of Chatham with the finance. I never saw that as our role. It reaches a point where it's above our pay grade, and they're the ones, and I think it's been alluded to. However, with no masks and physical meetings about to begin, I see probably a purpose for one more working group meeting where Michael and Scott would share the documents from Mount Greylock with the working group, and this, to allow that to transfer, even though it is a solid bunch of, I understand or I don't. And then at that point, we can just, the chair, you may then make a judgment whether or not the working group has served, and then the core group, Michael and Scott and the chair, would move forward with the select boards in a fashion that level of Greylock model may in fact be something that they say, gee, I like this, but let us now talk at the Chatham board. Oh, they don't.
Mm-hmm.
So,
So you're suggesting we have one more working group meeting with,
either the group or a reduced number of people, along with Scott and Michael, to present that information to Jeff as well as to Ms.
which,
Anderson here.
that makes sense, to have one more closure meeting with, this is what we've come up with, what do you think? Ms. Games?
Yeah, and I agree with that, because the expectation, I believe, based on what I witnessed on Monday at Harwich, is that there is at least going to be one more meeting, so they have a liaison.
They created a new
They
one at that
created a
meeting.
special, yeah. So I would definitely say, let's have one more. Four of us can be there, 2 of us can be there, but definitely one from each town, because we want to have it balanced, and we can make that decision tonight or not. But I think there is an expectation from Harwich.
Okay, so let's go ahead and leave Tina and Terry as the 2 Harwich members, as they've been on it. I've been on it, so is there a Chatham member that would like to, Mr. Osceola?
If we're not talking about a multi-year, then I'd be happy to do my part if you think that was useful. Also, I'm not quite so optimistic that one explanation from Mr. McMillan will get everybody clear. Nothing against Mr. McMillan whatsoever. It's just,
Looks like his head hurts too.
in the past, select board members from Chatham have come to school committee meetings. And they should, so if we have a meeting where something is discussed and then we set up a committee to discuss what the school committee has discussed, instead of that kind of elaborate middle school phone tag, why not just have the select board folks come here, which they've done before, and they'd be most welcome, of course.
Okay. Ms. Long, you had your zebra on.
I was just going to say that, do you want to update the subcommittee representative assignments, getting rid of working group, keeping it just the 2 liaisons?
Yes, cross off working group.
So we're not signing up for working group, we're only signing up for 1 Chatham and 1 Harwich
Liaison.
liaison.
Yes, ma'am.
And then the working group is going to carry on as already organized until further notice.
Until it defunks.
Sign away, Jackie, sign away.
Yes, ma'am.
So I'm not sure what the expectations of the liaison are to, like, I'll just tell you for Harwich. I don't know how often the Finance Committee meets, but the selectmen meet every single week. So if it was only one representative, certainly I wouldn't expect that one person to be at or even necessarily watching every single, both of those committees. I think it's too much for one person.
So
but
we'll,
I'm only speaking
as I
about
say,
me.
let's talk about that separately, because that's, when we're on to the working group, so we want to make sure
Okay.
we're working group discussion.
Okay.
So let's plan on having at least one more working group meeting with Mr. Osceola, Ms. Gaines, Mr. Russell, and myself, and the administration to do their presentation. And then we can kind of see where it goes from there. Does that sound, and then we'll report back what the working group says.
Well, at that point, we're done.
Yes.
Figure it out.
Yes,
How do you
we're
sign
done
up?
counseling.
How do you sign up for this?
Sounds like a wonderful 4th of July.
We'll do it on 4th of July. What about that?
Lots of fireworks.
Okay, so we are into subcommittee reports, finally. We have 3 policies on for the first reading. I believe, Ms. Stout, you're going to discuss student involvement in decision-making.
Yes, as we mentioned, I don't know whether it was last time or the time before, one of our goals for the year was to have, or at least explore, student involvement. And I did find out that there's actually a law that we're supposed to be doing this. I found out, talking to people through the Mass listserv, that it's very common that it isn't being done or isn't being done correctly. So I'm very excited about this. So you can see here that basically it's just what the law says. That there's going to be, it's supposed to be by the end of the year, but of course for this year it would have to be the beginning of the year, that somebody's selected and they nominate 5 students, and one person comes to our meeting and they can participate as a non-voting member. So that's pretty exciting. This is not what that teacher did. It's 2 separate things. That we may integrate something, but at presently this is something different.
Ms. Gaines?
If I can add that it was requested by Ms. McGuire that in accepting this, that we have the understanding that for the first year of implementation,
Yes.
that the because it says in here, the student's going to be voted in June, but we've already gotten past June. So for the first year, with the understanding, is that the student would be elected in the fall. I can't remember if it was September, October, but in the fall. But that's just for this next year, and then we go back to the June schedule.
Does that need to be written somewhere, or is
I
that
thought
going to
that
be
it probably, well, I don't think it has to be in the policy, but there has to be an understanding. So I don't know.
Could it be in our
Ms.
minutes?
Zebrat-Long?
I believe when we spoke at our last policy subcommittee meeting, and it was taking me a minute, remember, and finally I reiterated to Melissa, and she goes, yes, that's it. When we make the motion to pass the policy, we're asking that it's with the amendment, the verbal amendment, that this year only, this 21-22 school year only, that the student representative would be chosen in the fall of 2021. And then preceding years would be June. So that if we just make it in our motion, at the second reading, that's adequate.
Okay, thank you, that makes sense. Okay, anything else on this policy, any questions? This will come back at our next meeting for a vote with the amended, with the little
Verbal amendment.
verbal amendment.
The next
Okay,
one
thank
is
you.
the transfer, budget transfer.
Budget
And
transfer authority.
DBJ. And so basically, I think there's an error on this. If you just look at, did you want to say something, Michael?
No, I was just, if you had any questions about this.
No, but the
policy.
next one I will have. All requests for transfers between major accounts as defined by Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, otherwise known as DESE, must be submitted to the school committee for approval. Transfers between line items with a major account must be reported to the school committee as part of the Director of Business and Finance quarterly report at the business meeting of the school committee. And I think this is the error at the end, or the school committee's finance committee. I think, don't you, Michael? I guess I do have a question. Don't you always report that to the school committee?
Yes.
Okay, so could we just cross out the end of that, or the school committee's finance committee? I don't remember in our subcommittee meeting that coming up at all.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
take your red line version and cross off the last few words of the red.
Yes.
Or the school committee's finance subcommittee.
Yes,
So the policy will not include that.
yes,
Okay.
great. And Michael,
Great, so any questions on budget transfer authority? Is everybody clear on the minor edit? That is okay to pull forward for a second reading at our next meeting?
But just a question, maybe it's the last paragraph of the first page where it says, all excess over, blah, blah, any added funds shall be returned to the member municipalities. That does not cover how it works in regions.
Michael?
Sorry, I didn't catch that. Say again.
On file DBJ, the last paragraph and really the last sentence.
Yeah.
This really, I think, refers to Barnstable, Brockton,
Yeah, school
municipalities.
districts
It
attached to
doesn't refer
municipalities.
to regional schools which are allowed to keep funding at the end of the year into the E&D. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, that's municipality. That would be for Chatham Public Schools, Harwich Public Schools. The funds would be returned, but not in the region.
good catch.
So does that need to be there legally?
So that's the
the
policy
legal-
as it currently stands.
Okay.
So only the bit in red was what we've added
So does that need to be, go back to the policy subcommittee?
for change.
To verify, to make sure?
Yep.
That's a good catch.
Yeah.
All right, so
Well
we're just.
done, Terry.
I made a
Thank
good
you.
catch
You
years
did,
and years
you
ago.
did.
Yeah,
Well, it's also a legal reference, so we definitely need to
Yeah.
check
Yeah, you
it
need to
if it's something
verify,
we, yeah.
exactly. You need to verify legality of requirement or if it can be deleted.
it's good that we have a committee, so that's great, because that, as you
So-
said, has been in there,
That one will come back for a first reading.
yes.
Now
And-
we're on to district fraud policy.
Yeah, so generally, through Maskinow, this doesn't come up, but Michael suggested it, and it sounds, I'll let you talk about it.
So this was a recommendation from our auditor at our last audit. It wasn't, so when they did our audit, they give us findings, but also recommendations. We didn't have any findings, but this was one of their recommendations, that we should have a fraud policy that just outlines how we will deal with fraud should allegations or accusations of fraud arise, that we have a process for handling it. So it's really just making sure that we have a plan if anything comes up.
Did this come from MASC as well? Or is
So, no, MASC does not have a
Interesting.
template fraud policy. However, on their website, on the MASC, that's the
Right.
Massachusetts School Committee Association, or whatever. So they'd have both template policies, but also policies of other school districts. So there are a few school districts who have quite varying policies on fraud, and the auditor provided me a template fraud policy, but it was based on municipalities, so for towns. So I kind of took what the auditor gave us and adjusted it for our situation, and also included a couple of elements from other districts that they used that were similar.
Interesting. Any questions on Ms. Zebrat-Long?
Not specific to the fraud policy, just a general question.
Sure.
Is the last policy going back to the old policy subcommittee or the new policy subcommittee?
Oh, that's a good question.
If you have a meeting planned between now and July 14th, then it goes to the.
Absolutely
We
do
do
not.
So then, no, unless there is a reason for it to need to be passed sooner than later, Michael, is that okay if it waits until?
The fraud policy, yeah.
No,
Or
the budget transfer authority.
No, that can wait as well.
I mean, it probably would be ultimately September.
Smart answer.
Yeah.
By the time it goes there. Is that what you're saying? Is not it?
Good question, though.
Yep.
Okay, so that was
Just
that.
curious.
Yeah, that would be fine.
Okay. Just want to make sure it wasn't time sensitive. In which case, we're going to reorganize the current.
Right now.
Yeah.
I
All
would
right,
not
so any
think
questions
that
on the fraud policy? Seeing none, we will move that to our next meeting for a vote as well.
Thank you.
Superintendent's report. It's past my bedtime.
Do you remember when we had chairs that would get us out before 10 a.m. or 10 p.m.?
Yeah, those are good ones.
A decade ago.
I inherited this, just saying.
My parting gift.
So,
answer's
in
just gonna
terms
be like
of
this.
some recognitions, we'd like to thank the Friends of Pleasant Bay for the 2021 Virtual Learning Grant in the amount of $6,250 to the Monomoy Regional Middle School for the purchase of 25 Chromebooks for economically disadvantaged students. We'd also like to thank Mom and Pops located in Chatham for serving lunch to the middle school staff on Friday, June 18th. They graciously donated lunch for 75 people as a thank you to the teachers. We'd like to thank Mr. White at Chatham Village Market for his donation of hamburgers and buns and water. Ms. Coffrin at Shaw's for the $100 Shaw's gift card, and Mr. Gildman at Stop and Shop for the $50 Stop and Shop gift card. These donations helped support the Chatham Elementary PTO and Monomoy Community Services last day of school event at Hardings Beach. Each year, the last day of school, Chatham Elementary children and their families come together to celebrate the past school year and the school year to come. It's an important tradition. It was great to see it come back this year after a successful year during COVID. Any of the monies received for the purchase of food at the event go directly to the Monomoy Regional School District junior class to offset the upcoming senior class trip. The fire department also volunteered time to cook for the annual event. We'd also like to thank Dr. Cochran and the Outer Cape Health Services for helping vaccinate and provide physicals for some of our Chatham Elementary School EL students so that they could participate in the English language learner summer camp that we have going on, that's part of our Esser monies. And last but not least, I would like to acknowledge our retirees, and thank you, Sharon, for bringing this up. We have Catherine Brennell of our middle school. She was an instructional assistant with the district for 21 years. Cheryl Huffman, the administrative assistant to the principal at Harwich Elementary School, who had been there 14 years. Rich Houston, man legend in Harwich, who had been teaching history at Harwich High School and then at Monomoy Regional High School for 27 years. Karen Kelly, who, despite my son being the math science guy, Karen Kelly was and still is his favorite teacher ever. Karen Kelly was an English teacher at Harwich High School and then Monomoy Regional High School for 35 years. Wow. Richard Quinn, who was our fifth grade teacher at the middle school, had been with the district 27 years. Chris Roberts, who was the Chatham Middle School, High School music teacher, served a year as the Chatham Elementary School music teacher, and closed out his career as the Harwich Elementary School music teacher, 27 years serving the children of Harwich and Chatham. And last but not least, Betsy Simmons, who was a high school Spanish teacher in the district for 32 years.
Wow. Congratulations to them.
In terms of the COVID-19 update, we went and have retired the COVID-19 dashboard, hopefully retired it for good. I put something out to our staff on how we will be operating this summer and was giving guidance to our former chair with regard to this. I had put out a thing to staff saying that we will start heading into the new normal, which is not wearing masks during our last two professional development days that the teachers did Monday and Tuesday of this week. and had told folks that, if you haven't been vaccinated, please wear a mask, and being consistent with CDC guidelines, trying to go and, protect everyone and keep them safe. The state, the last conversation we had with the commissioner, or the superintendent had with the commissioner of education, they are not anticipating social distancing and masks for next year. I'm still a little worried at what it's going to look like at the elementary level. We have trailers behind each of the buildings that have stuff that we've pulled out of the buildings. I am not unpacking the trailers yet, because I'm a little worried that if we unpack the trailers and put it back in the classrooms, particularly at the grade levels where there aren't vaccines available, that we may just be setting ourselves up to have to put everything back into the trailers. But I am cautiously optimistic that things as we go into September will be very much like like they were pre-COVID. Knock on wood, because that the admin team will usually we sort of do a lot of planning during July. We're actually flipping that to allow everybody a chance to sort of decompress, but think it might be more fruitful to do a lot of our planning in August when we get a little better picture of what the landscape is, both here locally and statewide, and regarding COVID in the upcoming years. Last thing on there, Chatham had their annual town meeting a week ago Saturday. It's all blurring together.
This past, almost 2 weeks.
Yeah, and our budget was approved. Our budget was approved, and we, so we now can go and rest and relax for a moment for a month and a half before we start going into.
Month and a half, you get that long?
So we start going to FY23.
I thought that starts on July 2nd.
That's it for me.
Mr. Russell?
Madam Chair, as just heard about the admin team, I think it's a good idea about give it a real push in August rather than July for obvious reasons. I wonder if we should revisit our July 14th, because if we meet and there hasn't been some planning by staff for him to inform back to us as to what's going on, maybe we have 2 meetings in August. I know it sounds like I don't want to be here in July. Sorry about that. It was a desperate attempt at the debonair.
I want the meeting in August to look like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I withdraw my suggestion.
Let me give my, I don't know where to go with that.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
We do have 2 meetings in August.
Yeah, we do.
All right.
I further withdraw.
Madam Chair?
Tentative was the word we
Tentative,
said.
there's a
When we
tentative.
adopted
Yes,
it,
it
we
was
said
a
tentative.
tentative fourth meeting.
But it's already in my calendar, so if it's in my calendar, it's there.
It can be deleted.
August 11th is my birthday, so we could just have it at my house with cake.
Oh, there you go.
It's fine.
Wait, we have a meeting on August 11th?
Tentative,
That is your actual birthday?
it is,
Good to know.
and Hulk Hogan as well.
Even better.
Fun fact.
All
You
right,
dress
any
up,
other
Joe?
questions for the superintendent? Seeing none, we
So
move
many.
into action items. Our 2 last action items are the second reading and therefore vote on policy file BDG, school attorney. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Sharon?
Second.
Okay, Jackie motioned and Sharon seconded. Any discussion regarding that policy?
Gonna yell, Mary.
Was that, Meredith, was that you?
No.
Okay. All right, all in favor of passing file BDG school attorney?
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you. And the last one is policy file ADF, the wellness policies on physical activity and nutrition. I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Thank you, Meredith. Second?
Second.
Jackie, thank you. Any discussion? Yes, Sharon?
Whatever Joe said earlier, which I can hardly remember now.
You're invited to my birthday party.
In his dissension vote is where I am about this wellness policy. It is now 2.5 pages. It was 11 pages. Amy Middleton and I and some others worked so hard on that to make it really to do with having healthy meals. And now the sugar content is anything goes and a lot of other things. So the good thing is there is a place for a parent and teachers to work on a committee. But I can't say we're moving in a good direction on this. So that's all my comment.
Thank you. Any further discussion?
I
Yes.
have a question. So if, in this situation, a policy comes forth as a draft and we, I'm sorry, I'm losing my words.
It's okay. I've lost a lot.
Happens to all of us.
What happens if we don't approve a policy at this time? Does it go back to the policy subcommittee for reworking and?
Yeah, so
okay.
these two policies that we're approving were actually presented, well, one of them was presented many times. The school attorney one was presented many times and then came forward at our last meeting where there were no changes made. And since there was no changes made, that was the first reading. This is technically the second reading, then before we vote it. And then same thing with the wellness policy.
Can it have more than 2 readings? Kind of like, can it keep
Well, the
getting kicked
school-
back?
So yes, if we could approve this and there can be updated and reviewed. There might be some situations where a policy has additions that need to be made to it. There could be legal changes that happen. So the wellness policy could come back in 3 months with something legal change. Actually, the school attorney is a prime example, because last year we actually approved a school attorney policy, and then things came up and we decided that it wasn't quite right. So it was revised on December 10th of 2020, the school attorney, and has since been revised again, and we're voting on it now. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Any further discussion on the wellness policy? I think I have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
So we have 2 noes, but the motion still does carry.
1.5.
Yes, sir. I just know based on my numbers, but as long as we have the
Yeah, majority.
majority. Okay, so those policies have passed. The last on the action items is presentation of the warrants. They have been presented. And the last item is to accept a motion of adjournment.
So moved.
Just before you do that, Madam Chair,
Oh,
just an
yes.
announcement on sugar content and wellness. My wife and I are planning an open house for this committee. I'll get something out to you as to when. I'm thinking either late June or like a Friday, or do I want to do it in August?
Instead of a meeting? Yeah.
No, I'm not asking you what you prefer. It's what my wife
Okay,
prefers.
so
I'll let you, when you get a message, I'll give you directions, and we'll provide soft drinks and whatever else is appropriate, and we'll have an evening where we don't have to talk about.
We won't talk about anything.
Vicky gonna be there?
Dickie will be there. That's my kid brother. She's making fun of it, and it's gotten old.
Okay.
So.
All right, we have a motion to adjourn. Sharon, in a second.
Second.
Meredith, and no discussing, sorry. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? It is unanimous, and we are adjourning at 10:25.
A record.
Lord. Thank you, sir.
All righty.
Let's go out.
Oh, yeah, they didn't go out. Okay, just quietly while I'm thinking about it.